Chapter 184. The stone giant also appeared beside Sevilla. The chief judge of the church, Ahriman, was still dressed in white. This chief judge had a gloomy face and didn't look like a good person. The rest of the knights of the church, under the command of several knight commanders and the iron-blood Bishop Hemmons, had hurried here. They slowly approached the northern gate, coming to a halt outside the northern gate and forming several neat square formations. The rebels and slaves who wanted to escape Kelendil were all nervously watching the battlefield, although some of them were fighting with the religious zealots and some of the knights of the church. For many of them, this was the first time they had seen such a large army. Of course, Alonso's army had also rushed over. Under the black armor that flickered with cold light was a group of devils who took pleasure in harvesting the lives of heretics and people who knew magic. They were warriors blessed by the 7 gods, as well as believers who swore loyalty to the 7 gods. If not for Crocia and the others holding the fort here, many of them probably wouldn't even have the courage to raise their heads and look at the numerous enemies. Coleman, who was in the center of the formation, slowly drew his sword and pointed it at the temporary allied army formed by the rebels. Charge! A mournful roar covered everything and resounded throughout the battlefield. Behind him, nearly 1,000 Crimson Flame Knights flew toward the north gate. One had to know that these were the Crimson Flame Knights, one of the 3 most elite knight regiments of the church. They were fearless and invincible as they surged toward the rebels like a tide. At this moment, the rebels led by Crocia had been completely surrounded, and the situation was very unfavorable for them. The knights of the church quickly charged back and forth between the rebels, while Serena and the others fixed their gazes on them. The necks of the knights who were galloping at high speed suddenly exploded, and their heads flew high into the air as their bodies fell from the backs of their horses. Serena's flame explosion magic had shown its great power in the first round of battle with the Falcon Knight. The extremely fast speed caused the leader of the knights to die before he could react. Coupled with the magic of the Flame Servant Spirit, many well-equipped and well-trained Crimson Flame Knights died in the chaotic battle. For a moment, everyone worked together. Claudia released a magical storm of fire, lightning, falling rocks, and ice. The area where the northern gate was located was shrouded in magical radiance of various colors, and the world instantly turned dusky. Everyone, let's work harder. I think there's hope for this battle. If we win, we will be heroes in the future, the creators of the great history of the continent. In the midst of the chaotic battle, someone shouted loudly. The Circus of Freedom was also in the midst of it. Their people were tightly huddled together, seeking to protect themselves. On the other side, Sevilla and Ahriman were facing off against each other. Several blue rays of light flew out from Sevilla's hands and shot towards Ahriman. Suddenly, a misty light lit up, and wisps of blue water slowly rose up, enveloping the entire north gate. The ripples of light soon turned into thousands of threads, entangling many ordinary knights and religious zealots at the north gate, as well as the imperial soldiers who were not contributing at all. These soldiers were attracted by the power of the water waves, and were swallowed by the torrents that descended from the sky in groups. Waves after waves carried the soldiers of the Empire back into the city. In this way, Sevilla relied on her amazing water magic to send most of the ordinary enemies back into the city. Apart from the 3 major knight regiments, the Holy Knights, and the powerful knight commanders, there were almost no enemies left. This move of Sevilla's was very terrifying. None of her own people were injured, and the torrents formed by the magic seemed to have marked all the enemies. You dare to embarrass yourself with such petty tricks? Today, I'll make all of you witches fall here. The Ahriman was obviously somewhat angry. When had he, Ahriman, ever been afraid of people who knew magic? The presiding judge did not stand on ceremony either. With him as the center, a purple light enveloped the entire area, encompassing almost all of the rebels. I'll let you have a taste of my magic seal. A moment later, everyone was hit by Ahriman's move. No, this is absolutely impossible. I can't control my magic. The magic in my body seems to have been cut off. What's going on? Many of the rebels also relied on magic to attack. The group of mages looked at Ahriman in panic, and for a moment, they were at a loss. What made them even more terrified was that the magic they had released with great effort was actually being guided by a mysterious force and flying towards them. What kind of terrifying power was this? Such a huge magic seal was simply appalling. Sure enough, he was the oldest surviving paladin. The stone giant summoned by Sevia was directly destroyed at this moment, turning into a pile of rubble. Serena's and Nicella's flame and frost spirit also met the same fate. The battlefield became unpredictable for a moment. Even the sky returned to normal. It seemed that Claudia's magic had also lost its effect. Everyone fell into shock and despair. They did not expect the church to have such a powerful expert. This strength was simply too terrifying. Now I'll play with you. Ahriman revealed a treacherous smile. On the Falcon Knight's side, Gregory Gerard had yet to make a move. He knew that the Lord Ahriman had personally come, so naturally, he did not need to do anything. The most important thing for them was to guard the north gate and not let anyone out of the city. Coleman, Margaret, and the Iron Bishop Hemmons had long heard that the Lord Ahriman, who was in charge of the Court of Justice, was astonishingly powerful and old. He was also a fanatical believer who did things ruthlessly and mercilessly. Today they saw that the rumors were true. The moment he appeared, he almost forced the enemy into a desperate situation. For a moment, it seemed that a bloody massacre was about to unfold. Because the church had a one-sided advantage, the rebels could only surrender. They did not want to go to the prison of the church's court. They all knew how terrifying it was. At this moment, the fate of these people could only hope for a miracle to happen. But whether a miracle would happen or not, everyone knew in their hearts. Miracles did not happen every day, but it did not mean that they would never happen. Flames ignited in Serena's hands, and Nicella stabbed a nearby knight to death with an ice spear. Chapter 185. How is this possible? Presiding Judge Ahriman couldn't help but widen his eyes. He couldn't believe that someone could break through his magic seal. What's the matter, Presiding Judge? Is it very difficult to break your magic seal? If only we knew, perhaps we would understand the origin of magic more thoroughly than you. Serena said proudly. Go, capture these heretics. The presiding judge couldn't care less about anything else. He commanded the others to attack those who couldn't release magic for the time being. Then you'll have to ask if we agree to it first. Nicella, let's see who can kill more people. My enthusiasm is burning, haha. Serena laughed loudly. All right, although it feels boring, the screams of the knights of the church are still very pleasant to hear. Nicella curled her lips and cast frost magic at the same time. On Claudia's side, she had already secretly prepared an attack spell. Accompanied by a strong wave of magic, the air in Claudia's palm was compressed into a thin piece under the effect of the powerful magic, and then quickly flew towards Gerard. Woo! This magic with the appearance of a blade flew rapidly in the air, causing the air to fluctuate and forming a shocking cry. Have a taste of my wind blade spell. A string of magic spells in a strange language was sharply recited, and another blade-like spell formed in Claudia's hand. Whoosh! The magic blade shot out and swung continuously in the air, dazzling everyone who saw it. They didn't know how to dodge it. It was also the first time Gerard had seen this type of magic. He couldn't think of a good way to defend himself at the moment, and could only move his body quickly so that Claudia's spell couldn't accurately hit the target. Poochie, poochie. Claudia's wind blade spell didn't hit Gerard, and only left permanent marks on the bodies of 2 Falcon Knights. The bodies of the 2 Falcon Knights had already been cut in two. Gerard supported himself with both hands on the ground, and with a few rapid cartwheels, he moved his body behind an obstacle, dodging Croce's magic. He hid his whole body behind the obstacle, while his mind was constantly thinking of countermeasures. In an instant, Gerard continuously dodged Claudia's spells. He had already determined that this wind blade spell was a spell that focused on attacking a single target. Then, Gerard bent his knees and used the force of his legs to shoot out as if he was flying. After all, Gerard was one of the 10 great paladins of the church. He still had this bit of strength. Whoosh! A wind blade spell flew behind Gerard's counterattack just then. He had already rushed in front of Claudia. At this moment, Serena and Nicella were blocking the Inquisition leader's side. The rest of the rebels, in order to protect themselves, were fighting their own battles against the 3 great paladins of the church. Although they suffered heavy casualties, there were still some who could protect themselves. Seeing a scorching fireball whizzing towards him, the Inquisition leader Araman was greatly alarmed. Although he wasn't proficient in fire magic, he knew that the explosive power of this magician's favorite spell was quite astonishing. Even if it didn't hit directly, the spreading magical flames after the explosion would still cover a large area. Of course, what surprised Araman the most was Serena's strength. She could release flame bursts so casually, it was clear that her magic power was astonishing. This Serena really was a bit tricky to deal with. Araman's own magic power had been slowly honed over a long period of time in actual combat. Moreover, it was specifically used to deal with people who knew magic. How on earth did this young fellow in front of him do it? At this moment, what was even more exaggerated was that the unusually calm Sevilla actually released a very terrifying spell. This spell lifted up the entire ground in an instant. Everyone, including the rebels, was swaying left and right. At this time, many giant trees and plants grew out of the ground, completely destroying the entire north gate. Now that things have come to this, I have no choice but to use this move, Sevilla muttered to herself. Everyone, run if you can. I can only help you up to this point, Sevilla shouted at the same time. At this time, the north gate had become a dense forest. The magic power of these members of the Witch Council seemed to be inexhaustible. Haha, look at that witch still used this move. Serena smiled slightly. On her side, she and Nicella were fighting against the Inquisition leader. Coleman, Margaret, and Iron Bishop Hemmons were nowhere to be found. The terrain here had undergone a huge change, forcibly turning the north gate into a huge dense forest. This showed Sevilla's strength. She could use rock magic, water magic, and plant magic. She was truly a genius rarely seen in thousands of years. Otherwise, she wouldn't have become a member of the Witch Council. Araman, the Inquisition leader, didn't dare to take Serena's tyrannical attack head-on. It was barbaric and tyrannical. Araman could only hide behind a large tree. With a loud bang, the fireball containing a large amount of fire elemental energy exploded. Accompanied by thick smoke, the raging flames spread out in all directions without restraint, wildly devouring everything in the surroundings. Although Araman was already hiding behind a large tree, he could still feel the heat of the flames through the barrier between their arms. Araman's face instantly turned ugly. He knew that if it weren't for something blocking the expansion of the flames, his body wouldn't have been able to withstand such a blow. Of course, Serena's flame explosion was very powerful. In the eyes of Araman, it was indeed powerful, but it didn't mean that Araman wasn't a match for Serena. As an experienced paladin, Araman naturally learned how to deal with people who used fire magic. However, Nicella, who used ice magic, was at the side. Her strength was abnormally terrifying, and she was really difficult to deal with. But in fact, the two witches were only restraining Araman, and couldn't kill him. At this time, the rebels and the freed slaves had all scattered like birds and beasts, each fleeing for their lives. Those who survived took advantage of the chaos and the change in the terrain to escape, while the rest became corpses. Most of the people from the Circus Libra had taken advantage of the chaos to escape the city. They were still very grateful to the 4 beautiful witches of the Witch Council. But the witches of the Witch Council weren't so relaxed at this moment. They were all trapped and unable to escape. Suddenly, to everyone's surprise, a strange light enveloped the four of them, including Claudia, who was almost stabbed by Gerard's sword. In an instant, the four of them were directly teleported to the town of Bohep outside Kelendal City. Who had saved them? They didn't know for the time being, and could only desperately escape to the north. Chapter 186. After a long time, Sevia's magic disappeared. The plants at the north gate had all disappeared, leaving behind a mess. When Avina and I saw the result, we quietly hid. We still had to help the little girl investigate her father's whereabouts, so we had to stay hidden. There were injured knights and imperial soldiers everywhere. It was a tragic sight. The ground was covered in corpses and ruins. The church had gone all out in this operation, but they hadn't expected such a result. It was truly tragic. Regardless of whether it was Gerard, Margaret, Coleman, the Iron Cardinal Hemmons, or the presiding Judge Araman, these were the forces that the church relied on the most. This time, Pope Exi would most likely be disappointed. The church had tried their best this time, but ended up with such a result. It could be said that they had lost all their faith. Alonso had originally only done the work, but he hadn't expected that even after the church had used all their trump cards, the rebels still managed to escape. If they had really relied on them, it would have been even worse. Now, Alonso had to think about how to clean up this mess. Otherwise, it would be difficult to explain to the little emperor. But no matter what, these people of the church would have a hard time explaining to the Pope. This operation could be said to have a great impact, enough to even shake some things. In the Hall of Heroes, the Empire's chief magic consultant, Morse, lived in a private tower. Morse looked at the stone ball and saw that the four witches of the Witch Council had been teleported to the town of Bohep. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly, looking somewhat treacherous. "Crocia, this time, I'm afraid you'll owe me a favor." After saying this, Morse stroked his black cat. The black cat stretched its body with a look of disgust, jumped off Morse's knee, and ran away. As for the four witches who had been rescued, they had suddenly appeared in this desolate and dilapidated town. They were still in a state of shock. They didn't know who had cast a spell to teleport them here, freeing them from the church's entanglement and saving their lives. However, they knew that this person was unfathomable, or at least had astonishing magic power. They didn't dare to stay for too long, and quickly set off for the north. There, they would meet the king of the kingdom of Northland, Gravel. As for me and Avina, based on some information, we roughly know where the little girl's father is being held. After going through a lot of difficulties, we found an imperial prison bunker. The little girl's father is most likely locked up here. Taking advantage of the hazy night, Avina and I quietly got rid of the Empire soldiers guarding outside and entered the bunker through a door. Once we entered the bunker, we saw a huge room. This room should be the resting place of an Empire soldier. There were 3 beds in the room. There was an elk's head on a stone pillar in the middle, and there was a large storage box at the foot of each bed. There were also many torches on the wall. On the other side of the wall, there was an imperial flag with a black lion on a red background. There was a small dining table with 4 gold coins on it. There were also some bowls and skulls. There was also a book on the bookshelf called Mixed Forces Combat Strategy. I picked up the book and flipped through it. Then, the book disappeared. I like to collect books. I also found an Empire Light helmet, an Empire Light armor, and 2 gold coins. I chose to take them all. There was also mead and wine on the table, so I took them all. Avina watched my performance. Her surprised expression was exaggerated. She didn't know when I became so stingy. I took everything. Then, we pulled a mechanism, and the door to the room opened. This was the door to the next room. At this time, I saw that there was another door. It seemed that a few Empire soldiers were there, talking and laughing. It seemed that a battle was unavoidable. I signaled Avina and pulled the iron ring. The door opened just like that. There were 2 Empire soldiers outside the door. I didn't say anything and rushed to fight them. The two Empire soldiers were holding huge iron axes and iron war hammers. Both were two-handed weapons. I knew that these weapons were powerful. With our nimbleness, Avina and I each killed one of the Empire soldiers in an instant. We were in a large hall. There was a circular red carpet on the ground. There was also a table and 2 chairs in the hall. I didn't care if the corpses on the ground were willing or not. I put all their belongings into my spatial ring, turning them into 2 naked corpses in an instant. Fortunately, Avina didn't object. She just thought that we should find the little girl's father and save him as soon as possible. Then, Avina and I used the key we found to open the iron door on the other side. We entered the spiral staircase that led downstairs. There was a wooden cart with a few cabbages on it. There were also a few bags with potatoes in them. The two of us walked down the dark spiral staircase. When we reached a corridor, we entered a door in front of us. There was a candlestick at the door. After opening the door, the two of us entered a room with a warm fireplace. The first thing that caught my eye was a rabbit and a pheasant hanging on the roof. There was also a huge fur of an unknown animal on the wall. At this time, I sensed that there were other people in the room. As expected, there were 2 more people in the room. They were Imperial officers. It seemed that another battle was unavoidable. I gave Avina behind me a look. She immediately understood what I meant. The 2 of us snuck behind the stone pillar and attacked the Imperial soldier at the same time. Just like before, there was no suspense. The 2 of them were too weak. Haha, with our strength, coming here was as easy as taking something out of our pocket. At this time, I had time to look around the room. There was a small dining table in the room. There was also a large dining table with some cutlery on it. This room seemed to be the Imperial dining room. There was a lot of food inside. There was bread, salt, a cast iron pot, wooden bowls, wooden spoons, and wine glasses on the dining table. There was also wine on the kitchen rack next to the dining table. There were also 2 pieces of charcoal in the bottom drawer. There was also a beer barrel on the dining table. There was also a beer barrel under the 3 kitchen racks next to it. There were also candles on a horn base on the dining table. I didn't hesitate to put all the supplies into my spatial ring in front of Avina. Of course, I also included the 2 Imperial officers' belongings on the ground. Then, I began to search a place where goods were stored. There were many wooden barrels and bags there. Chapter 187. I found some potions, green apples, tomatoes, as well as salt, cabbage, and rabbit leg meat. There was also a green bird egg. Avina told me that it was the egg of the stony nightingale, a wild bird. There was so much food, and I was very happy. After eating some bread, I put it all into the space ring. After leaving here, we went down the stairs to the interrogation room. The first thing that caught my eye was a skeleton that was hung up and 3 vertical rectangular iron cages. There was a battle going on in the interrogation room, and 2 Imperial soldiers were lying dead on the ground. Who did it? To be able to get here without causing any alarm, it seemed that the person who broke in was not an ordinary person. In the interrogation room, there were 2 torturers. Both of them looked like perverted torturers, but now they were lying dead on the ground. I also saw a book called Against Tyranny, a dagger, and a backpack on a small table next to the stone pillar in the middle. There was a lockpick in the backpack, so I took the lockpick. I tried to open the door of the middle of the 3 vertical rectangular iron cages. Because the 2 next to it were empty, only the middle one had the body of a magician's apprentice lying on it. It was as if I suddenly knew how to do it. I was still very smart. It took me a little time to open the door of the iron cage. There were many things inside, including magic potions, some gold coins, a magic hood and magic robe, and a magic book for lightning magic. These were all good things, so I didn't hesitate to take them. After taking all of them, Snowy took everything in the interrogation room and in one of the cells. There was an iron shield, a heavy iron hammer, and a book called A Brief History of the Empire. I didn't care so much. As long as there was enough space, I would take it all. At this time, Avina asked me if we could go, and I said yes. We went deeper, and then we saw another room. There were 3 cages, a charcoal basin, and some dining tables. Then there was a skeleton and a skeleton that didn't become a skeleton. I got some gold coins and bone dust from the skeletons, but I didn't even let the skeletons go. I couldn't help but think so, because I had my own plans. I could only do this. When we left the room, we found ourselves in a wide open area where 3 Imperial soldiers had appeared out of nowhere and were waiting for us. Meanwhile, on the other side of the prison, the pitch-black night was as cold as water. The moon's shadow danced in the air, illuminating the ground in a deathly white color, as if it was the face of a ghost. The little girl's father was in a corner of the cell. The moonlight shone through the narrow skylight and shone on his cheeks, revealing a bleak gray color. His entire body was covered in blood, and the clothes on his back were tattered. There were many whip marks on his body, and the scariest part was that his collarbone had been pierced by a thin chain. Purple blood gushed out whenever he moved. The chain was exquisitely made. It was as thick as a thumb, and it was engraved with complicated patterns. There was also a silver bell hanging from it. With a slight movement, the bell would ring, and the crisp sound echoed in the deathly silent cell. His younger brother had been in there for a long time. Although it was raining outside, it was summer after all, and it wasn't that cold. He was wearing a black cloak and deerskin boot. If his face wasn't so pale, he would be a handsome man. He just stood there, looking at his brother silently. The cell door was wide open, and he was only a few steps away from him. He was so close that he could touch his brother's torn clothes if he reached out his hand. The night wind blew in, bringing with it the unique dampness of the prison. The hair on his temples was lifted, and it made his face look even paler. "Does it hurt?" his younger brother asked. His older brother didn't look at him, and he didn't say anything. His younger brother took off his black cloak, walked slowly to him, and put it on his shoulders. Seeing the chain around his collarbone, he smiled faintly and gently twisted it. "On the day of the summer celebration, I told you not to go, but you didn't listen to me. Now I can only help you this much." Then he left, and he finally left. The sound of his footsteps was getting farther and farther away. It was so far away that it gradually couldn't be heard, as if it would never come again. The little girl's father was still lying there quietly. He didn't move, didn't speak, and didn't react at all. It was so quiet all around, and only the sound of the bell around his collarbone echoed softly, making the surroundings seem even more empty. The little girl's father lay there, as if he couldn't hear anything from the outside world. He only felt that the night was so long, as if it had been a lifetime. He knew that this day would come. He knew it when Alonso brought people to surround them. Did he feel ashamed? Disgusted? Or was he so dirty that he wanted to die? I just don't know how my daughter is." The little girl's father sneered, but his voice was hoarse and terrifying, like an old man in his 70s. He closed his eyes, and his eyes seemed to be burning. They were hot and dry, and even tears couldn't flow out. He just wanted to lie here and die here. He wanted to bury this filthy, disgusting, despicable, and lowly thing in this murky night. If it was someone else, what would they do? Cry endlessly? Be heartbroken? Curse out loud? Or die by hitting his head on a rock? Or die cleanly like the others? But he couldn't die yet. He had to live, not only for his daughter. He moved his numb hand, turned his wrist over, and saw a dagger under the cloak. He sat up, held the dagger, and sneered faintly. He walked to the door of the prison, and swung the dagger at the chain. The door lock broke. This dagger really cut through iron like mud, just like his younger brother. It was extraordinary. The prison outside the door was filled with guards and wardens who were sleeping. They seemed to have been drugged. His younger brother was really a mysterious person. The little girl's father sneered and walked along, but he didn't see anyone wake up. Just like that, he followed his younger brother's path, and slowly found his way out of this huge prison. Iwina and I thought that we would meet a lot of people from the Empire in this prison, but to our surprise, we didn't meet any resistance along the way. Who did this? It doesn't seem like something a human could do. Could it be that an expert snuck in here? But why did he do this? With a series of questions, we finally found an empty prison cell. Looking at the bloodstains on the ground, it was obvious that this person had escaped. Could it be the little girl's father? Or maybe someone else saved him before us. Iwina blamed me for letting someone else get ahead of us. It seemed that I was careless. Chapter 188. A few days later, order was restored in Kellendal. The casualties in the Colosseum had dealt a heavy blow to the Empire. However, Kaiser the Great had his ways. The Colosseum had now reopened. At this time, in the arena, the first person to come out was a young man wearing leather armor with a long sword at his waist. He was in high spirit. As he walked, he waved to the audience who were praising him. However, most of the time, his eyes were still looking at a beautiful woman in the stands. His eyes were filled with undisguised love. The man in black couldn't help but laugh. It seems that this young man is quite infatuated with you. Aren't you going to give him some encouragement? The beautiful woman didn't even look at the man in black. She said angrily, "There are too many people who are infatuated with me. If I encourage everyone, wouldn't I be looking for trouble? For someone I don't like, I should firmly reject him from the beginning and not let him have the slightest room for fantasy. This is a responsible attitude towards both parties. Don't you think so?" When the beautiful woman said these words, she didn't even look at Messiah. However, the man in black felt that every word she said was directed at him. There was an indescribable awkwardness in his heart. In fact, if he said that he didn't have a good impression of the beautiful woman, he would be lying to himself. Perhaps he didn't have such a good impression of her before, but after these few days of interaction, the beautiful woman's straightforward personality attracted him. However, the difference between the two of them was there. Although the man in black didn't feel inferior, he didn't have much confidence that the two of them could be together. Perhaps after he had some achievements, this lack of confidence would gradually disappear, but now, thinking of this, the man in black said in a low voice, "It's easy to like someone, but it's not so easy to be together. Maybe it'll be better when the two of us have similar status." The beautiful woman frowned and almost turned her head to look at the man in black. "So," she patiently continued, "as long as the two of them have the heart, what difficulties can't be solved? Only people with weak hearts would think that way, right?" Hey, the young man's opponent has appeared. I want to watch the game. Let's talk about this later. The man in black evaded the question. The black-clothed man's voice finally interrupted the young man and young lady who had just experienced their first awakening of love. The two of them finally fell silent and temporarily turned their gazes towards the arena. A strange young man instantly attracted everyone's attention. It was a thin young man about the same age as the man in black. His slightly delicate face seemed to have a hint of naivety and shyness. He wasn't tall, and he wore brown clothes with a black hooded cloak on his back. The strangest thing was that on his thin left shoulder there was a crow with black feathers all over its body. But its eyes were as red as blood. When the young man saw his opponent coming out, his face couldn't help but turn gloomy. He secretly cursed the Kellendal Colosseum in his heart. He didn't doubt the strength of this young man. If he could become a gladiator in the Kellendal Colosseum, he wouldn't be a weakling. The problem was that this opponent was too young. In fact, he looked even younger than the young man. In the young man's plan, his opponent should be a burly gladiator with a ferocious face. At first glance, he could tell that the gladiator was very powerful and brutal. In this case, after a difficult battle where both sides were evenly matched, he could tenaciously win the best visual effect. It would definitely satisfy most people's imagination of a righteous warrior. However, if the opponent was such a thin, young, and even a little shy boy, the effect would be greatly reduced. Even if he won, it wouldn't be a glorious thing. With anger rising in his chest, the young man sneered and said with a mocking tone, "Is there no one else in the Kellendal Coliseum? Why did they send a kid who hasn't even reached puberty yet? Hey kid, if you don't want to get hurt, go back. Otherwise, you will bleed later." The young man's words immediately attracted the support and laughter of a large group of people in the audience. A few people even yelled at the young man to go home and drink milk. However, there were still some people who kept their mouths shut tightly and stared at the young man without blinking. Their eyes were filled with fear and excitement. "Hey, why is Hei Wu fighting today? Isn't bringing a pet to the competition banned?" "How would I know? Since Hei Wu killed his opponent, I have never seen him fight again. Ha 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 ha, but this is really a good opportunity to make money. Who did you bet on?" "Hei Wu, of course. But I have also heard of this young man. He seems to be very strong. He is also a noble." "Tsk, so what if he is a noble? These cowardly nobles are best at fighting with women in bed. They are not good at fighting with real swords and guns in the arena." "You are wrong. For gladiators, equipment is also very important. As a noble, at least his equipment will not be bad." "Then you should bet on that noble. Why did you bet on Hei Wu?" "This. I am more confident in Hei Wu. But it seems that many people have not seen Hei Wu's fight before. They are all betting on the young man to win. I did not dare to chat with you when I placed my bet. I was afraid that someone would hear me and bet with us, lowering the odds." "Oh? You too?" "Me too. Ha 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 ha." Similar conversations continued to spread in the audience. Gradually, the noise stopped. Everyone's eyes were focused on the arena. Other than the sound of heavy breathing, there was no other sound in the arena. The strange atmosphere in the audience suddenly quieted down. Finally, a trace of uneasiness rose in the young man's heart. He pulled out his sword. The blade that looked like it was made of gold shone dazzlingly under the sun. It also drove away the haze in the young man's heart. Looking at the sword in his hand, the young man's confidence was greatly boosted. This sword was the best sword his father had bought for him at a high price. Not only was it extremely sharp, but it also had the effect of dazzling the opponent. With this sword in hand, the young man's confidence and courage instantly climbed to the peak. He also thought that no matter how strong his opponent was, he would still lose to him. He could not help but smile. With a thought, he activated the special effect of the sword in advance. The sword that was already shining with a golden light suddenly burst out with a strong light. This strong light was so dazzling that it almost blinded people. The audience immediately let out a series of exclamations. There were even people near the arena who covered their eyes and cried out in pain. When the audience got used to this light, they realized that the young man on the arena was bathed in this strong light. He was like a god of light descending from the heavens. He was majestic and had an extraordinary aura. Chapter 189. The young man's performance once again caused an uproar in the audience. Many people cheered loudly, and some bold female spectators even sent flirtatious glances and flying kisses. The scene was extremely lively. In the VIP seats, the black-clothed man pointed at the young man and said with a face full of disbelief, "Why didn't I think he was this stupid? This skill is a trump card that can turn defeat into victory at a critical moment, and this guy used it so early. Is he that confident?" The beautiful woman also found it difficult to understand the young man's actions. She shook her head and said, "I don't know either, but some people are like this. They look smart in small matters, but when it comes to big matters, they become muddle-headed. Is this young man also such a person?" The black-clothed man smiled bitterly. "Who knows, but we should find out soon. The battle is about to begin." The youth nicknamed Black Raven gently put down the hand that was covering the crow's eyes, revealing only a sliver of his eyes as he looked at the young man opposite him. He frowned and whispered to himself, "What an annoying light. I hate light the most. I really want to kill him, but the higher-ups only want me to break his legs. Then let's end this quickly." After he finished speaking, Hei Wu shook his shoulder, and the crow flapped its wings and flew into the air, letting out a series of coarse and hoarse cries. After that, Hei Wu's legs didn't move at all, but his entire body soared into the air like a weightless black smoke, attacking the young man. His speed was so fast that people couldn't see him clearly. The young man was shocked by Black Raven's speed. The sharp sword in his hand instinctively drew a semicircle in front of him, and this action saved him from instant defeat. With a loud bang, the young man suddenly retreated, and the sword in his hand trembled visibly. Black Raven stood where the young man had been standing, holding a strangely curved iron rod in each hand, which looked like a sickle and a cane. Looking at the young man who had retreated 3 or 4 meters, Black Raven smiled and said, "Not bad, you can still hold a sword. Then you'll have to suffer a little more." As soon as Black Raven finished speaking, he jumped up again, and in an instant, he was right above the young man's head. The iron rods in his hands were like 2 black bolts of lightning as they fiercely chopped down. The young man was shocked. Ignoring the trembling hand holding the sword, his other hand grabbed the sword hilt and blocked above his head. Bang! Another crisp sound of metal clashing rang out. This time, the young man was even forced to kneel down by the jet-black iron rod. Such a heavy and shockingly fast attack was something he had never seen before in his life. He was almost stunned by it. However, the young man was a person who had received formal gladiator training, and he was quite talented. Seizing the opportunity when Hei Wu could not continue to exert force in the air, he shouted and swung his sword. Finally, Hei Wu was deflected away. Hei Wu somersaulted in the air and landed back on the ground. With a twist of his wrists, he drew a circle in the air with his 2 iron rods and held them tightly in his hands. Seizing this short opportunity, the young man took 2 steps forward as he roared in a low voice that only he and Hei Wu could hear, "Are you crazy? Do you know who I am? Didn't your superior tell you to lose? You want to lose to me, you idiot." Hei Wu was slightly stunned when he heard what the young man said. A shy smile appeared on his face, and he nodded slightly, indicating that he understood what the young man said. Only then did the young man feel a little more at ease. His palms continued to gently bend and stretch. When the numbness and weakness disappeared, he let out a loud roar. He fiercely waved the long sword in his hand 3 times. 3 sharp crescent-shaped golden lights rushed towards Hei Wu. The sharp metal do-chi plowed 3 deep marks on the ground. Hei Wu seemed to have lost the speed he was so proud of in an instant. He rolled to the side clumsily and narrowly dodged the golden light. Then, he held the iron rod with both hands and attacked the young man. His movements were clumsy and jerky. The young man secretly cursed his opponent's clumsy acting skills. At this time, he had just recovered from the shock, and he could not care too much about it. The long sword in his hand drew a perfect circle in the air, and a circular golden ring appeared out of thin air. As he swung his sword again, the golden ring whizzed toward Hei Wu in a subtle arc. This move could be considered the young man's unique skill. He had once broken the record of breaking 4 hard wooden poles in a row. If it hit a person, it could definitely cut the person in half. Because of the difficult situation at the beginning of the fight, his heart was already filled with killing intent. If he could kill the young man in front of him, he would not hesitate. But just as the golden ring was about to hit Hei Wu, and the young man's eyes showed a trace of cruelty, Hei Wu smiled. His smile was full of ridicule and disdain. The young man could even see Hei Wu's lips move slightly as he said 2 words. "Idiot." In the next moment, the golden ring finally hit Hei Wu. It passed through his body at an extremely fast speed. Immediately, a burst of terrified screams erupted from the audience. But then, the audience strangely discovered that not a single drop of blood spurted out. And Hei Wu, who was cut by the golden ring, slowly turned into an afterimage and disappeared. The young man's heart instantly fell to the bottom. In his horrified eyes, Hei Wu suddenly appeared in front of him. That shy smile was like the evil grin of a demon in the young man's eyes. Then, a sharp pain came from his left leg. His leg bone was broken. After his left leg was broken, the young man lost his balance. He threw down his sword and hugged his leg on the ground as he screamed in pain. He could no longer care about maintaining his noble demeanor. At the same time, a figure slowly walked towards the VIP seats where the black-clothed man and the others were. He coughed lightly, and before they could turn around, the figure spoke with malice. "Long time no see. How was it? This fight was very exciting, wasn't it? I've specially prepared this for you." As soon as the familiar voice sounded, the beautiful woman's face turned ugly. The two of them stared at the brown-haired young man who appeared in front of them with a serious expression. Just as they were about to speak, the young man waved his hand and stopped them. "Don't be in a hurry to greet me. Watch the fight. Ha 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 ha, your friend only has one leg broken now. He still has another. Don't worry, we will have time to catch up. Ha 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 ha." With a wild laugh, the young man turned and left, leaving behind the beautiful woman with a serious expression and the confused black-clothed man. When the young man walked far away, the black-clothed man curiously asked in a low voice, "Is that person your friend? How interesting." He actually wanted to break the young man's legs. Although the method is a bit cruel, it can be considered as helping us vent our anger. Is he from this arena? That's not it, but the people below will definitely lose their legs, the beautiful woman said in a meaningful tone. Chapter 190. The man in black looked at the fading figure, and he could not help but feel pity for the young man in the arena. He shook his head and sighed. The man in black then asked, "Although I don't know why he did this, it's obvious that he has some power in this arena. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to control the competition. What are you going to do?" Look, the other leg of the young man was also broken by that guy. Hey, he's really ruthless. But this guy called Hei Wu is really strong. The beautiful woman turned to look at the man in black. The black-clothed man turned his gaze to the arena. Sure enough, he saw the young man lying on the ground, his body twitching non-stop. He had already fainted, and his two legs were twisted in an unnatural manner. His bones had clearly been shattered. TSK, even if the church's Saint Healer came to treat him, it would be difficult, right? He can be cured, but I don't know if there will be any sequelae. Hearing the words of the man in black, the beautiful woman's face turned ugly. The man in black teased, "What? Are you starting to worry about him?" The beautiful woman glared at the man in black and said, "I'm worried about you, you fool. There must be someone behind that brown-haired young man. This person is a ruthless character who can control the arena. Although I don't know who he is, he definitely won't dare to touch me. But you're in danger." Looking at the worried look of the beautiful woman, the man in black still said indifferently, "It's okay. I'm not as weak as you think." The beautiful woman's expression became serious. She stared at the man in black and said, "I hope you can face this matter seriously. I know you should be very strong, but do you think you can deal with all the gladiators in the Sun God Arena? Let me tell you, according to my information, a new group of peerless masters has recently come to solve all kinds of problems for the arena. Unless you can defeat them, then I'm worried for nothing." Hearing these words, the black-clothed man's complexion changed. No matter how confident he wasn't stupid enough to think that he could match those peerless experts. He had almost died when he faced some ordinary elites, let alone peerless experts. Thinking of this, the man in black could not help but frown. After a while, he said to Wei Yi in a deep voice, "I should be safe with you, right? Can you get us out of here?" After thinking for a moment, the beautiful woman shook her head and sighed, "I'm afraid it will be very difficult for me to bring you out. Since the brown-haired youth dared to show himself, he must have a thorough plan. Although they don't dare to hurt me, they can easily imprison me. At that time you will also die. Now, unless my father shows up, no one can take you away." Just as the black-robed man was silent, the beautiful woman suddenly laughed. She patted the black-robed man's shoulder and said softly, "Black-robed man, I'm sorry. I've implicated you again. It's hard to say who will implicate who. In that case, I might also cause you trouble." After a while, a staff member came to the VIP seats and said loudly, "Hello sir, it's your turn soon. Please follow me to the preparation area." The man in black quickly raised his hand and responded loudly. Then, he winked at the beautiful woman and left with the staff with a smile. After the black-robed man left, the beautiful woman smiled softly and said with a cold look in her eyes, "It's a pity that I didn't bring enough money." Seeing that the match had ended, the host raised his voice with a loudspeaker stone, "Dear distinguished guests, today is really a good day. Hei-Woo just put on a wonderful performance for us, and now, another brave guest is going to challenge us. His opponent is the ruthless Killer Bee, that all of you are familiar with. Please give this guest a round of applause. Although he is just a fledgling teenager and has no fighting experience, his courage is worthy of praise." Suddenly, there was a strange sound of mockery from the audience. After the previous match, the audience had obviously lost their confidence in the amateur players. They thought that no matter how tall and beautiful the flowers in the greenhouse were, they would not be able to withstand the ravages of the storm. The black-robed man slowly walked into the arena under the boos of the audience. At this time, he was a little nervous, but more than that, he was excited. Finally, it was time for him to fight someone again. The so-called strong person was someone who treated his opponent as a ladder through continuous battles. Step by step, he would walk the path to the top. Today, he would cross these stairs. Thinking of this, the black-robed man took a deep breath and got rid of the distracting thoughts in his mind. At this time, the host continued to raise his voice. "Next, let's welcome the opponent of this brave young man. The old man of the gladiator arena, who loves to torture his opponents and has the cruelest personality, Killer Bee. I didn't expect that there would be another match today, and it's such a young and handsome guy. I can't bear to do it." Following a shrill and strange laugh, a lean and skinny man with long arms and legs walked into the field with a hunched back. The man was holding a spear that was as tall as a person. Under the sunlight, the spear flickered with a biting cold light. After the contestant came on the arena, the host silently walked out of the arena. Just like the previous match, there was no sound. This was the rule of the Kellendale Coliseum. As long as the contestant walked into the arena, the match would start. There was no need for any preparation. As for the end, only when the opponent admitted defeat or lost consciousness and fell to the ground, or even when one of them died, would the match truly end. Spinning the spear in his hand like a wheel, Killer Bee cruelly licked his lips with his tongue and laughed softly. "Child, don't worry. I will treat you very gently. At most, it will be like being stung by a bee." After speaking, Killer Bee laughed strangely and began to run around the black-robed man. The spear in his hand was sharp, as if it could attack from any direction. Facing the Killer Bee's charge, the black-clothed man stood motionless in the same spot. After having fought with others before, he already knew that he could not blindly dodge, or else it would be easy to fall into the opponent's trap. Only by calmly waiting for the opponent to make a move was the best time to dodge and counterattack. Seeing the black-clothed man standing there like a wooden stake, the Killer Bee grew impatient. It transformed into a flash of green light that wrapped around the tip of the spear. From a very tricky angle, it pierced towards the black-clothed man's thigh. Killer Bee's spear was just like his nickname. It was like the stinger of a poisonous bee, silently stabbing towards the black-robed man. But just as the stinger was about to pierce into the black-robed man's thigh, the black-robed man suddenly turned and lifted his leg. He dodged the spear by a hair's breadth and stepped on the tip of the spear. Chapter 191. Killer Bee was shocked. He immediately tried to pull his spear back, but found that the tip of the spear did not move. It was as if it was not a foot that was pressing down on it, but a small mountain. Killer Bee's battle experience was indeed rich. He immediately used the spear as a fulcrum, and his entire body flew horizontally in the air. His right leg swept viciously towards the black-clothed man's head, fast and ruthless. But this sweep was blocked in midair by the black-clothed man. Before Killer Bee could change his move, the black-clothed man's free fist had already slammed into his chest. Time seemed to stop for a moment, and in the next moment, Killer Bee, who had maintained his horizontal position, lost his balance and fell to the ground, never to move again. This fight was dull and boring, without any excitement to speak of. It could not even be compared to street performers, and of course it could not satisfy the audience who had paid to watch the fight. A wave of angry curses rose from the stands. "Killer Bee, what are you doing? You couldn't have been beaten up by this kid who hasn't even grown hair yet, could you? Get up, Killer Bee. I've bet heavily on you. Get up. A fake fight, this must be a fake fight. Refund the money we bet." The clamor rose, and almost everyone was shouting for Killer Bee to get up. But in the end, the gladiator who had the audience's high hopes failed to live up to their expectations, because he had already lost consciousness and fainted. Very quickly, this famous gladiator was taken away, and the black-clothed man remained standing on the field. The host walked onto the field, his face full of excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen, I did not expect our brave young man to be so skilled. I admit that I misjudged him, but please believe that the Kellendale Coliseum will not disappoint you. Next, let us welcome the homicidal maniac that we have not seen in a long time, Sanguine Ape, onto the field." Wow! The noise was replaced by a chorus of gasps. Clearly, the name Sanguine Ape held more weight in the hearts of the audience than Killer Bee. "It's actually Sanguine Ape. Ha 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 ha, the tickets today were really worth it. This is one of the top gladiators in the Coliseum. Yeah, I haven't seen Sanguine Ape in a competition for more than a month. I didn't expect to see him fight against this kid today. Hurry up and place your bets. This time, I'm going to win back all that I lost just now with interest. Haha, I didn't expect to be able to win back my losses so quickly. I think this kid is a little strange. But if it's a blood ape, it shouldn't be a problem, right?" Amidst the discussions and exclamations of the crowd, a tall and sturdy figure slowly walked out in front of the black-clothed man. This was a red-haired man. His body was huge, but his entire body was filled with bloodthirst and violence. After seeing the burly man come out, the audience burst into a deafening roar, as if their emotions had reached a climax. The man in black frowned as he looked at his opponent, who was also looking at him. The square-faced, thick-lipped Sanguine Ape revealed a hint of excitement in his bloodshot eyes. "Little bastard, I'll twist your head off and use it as my chamber pot later. But don't worry, it's rare for me to come out. I won't kill you so quickly." In the face of Sanguine Ape's provocation, the man in black sneered in his heart. He stretched out his hand and waved at his opponent. This silent contempt ignited his opponent's anger. Sanguine Ape suddenly jumped up and waved his fist at the man in black. The man in black wanted to test the strength of his opponent's fist. He didn't dodge. Instead, he raised his right arm and blocked the incoming fist. His body didn't move at all. Sanguine Ape's eyes narrowed. He was shocked. There was a huge difference between his body and the man in black's, but his opponent was able to completely block his fist. He didn't even tremble. This meant that his opponent's strength wasn't below his. Also, looking at his opponent's body, he must be an agile fighter. If that was the case, then it would depend on who had the upper hand first and who had more stamina. Thinking of this, Sanguine Ape did a somersault in the air like an agile giant ape. He clenched his hands into claws and grabbed at the back of the man in black's head. His 5 fingers revealed a faint golden light. If his opponent was grabbed by his 5 fingers that were filled with gold do-chi, he would be torn to pieces unless his opponent's body was made of iron. The man in black lowered his head and dodged the claw. He turned around and grabbed Sanguine Ape's wrist with his left hand. Under his opponent's surprised gaze, his right fist landed on Sanguine Ape's chest. Thus, the scene from before happened again. Sanguine Ape maintained his fixed position for a moment before he fell to the ground, kicking up a large cloud of dust. Everyone in the audience stared blankly at this familiar scene. For a moment, no one spoke. The whole place was silent. After more than a minute, Sanguine Ape was still lying on the ground, motionless. The man in black raised his hand and shouted, "He's fainted. Where's my next opponent?" The whole place was in an uproar. It can't be? Sanguine Ape was defeated so easily? Who is this young man? Could he be a peerless expert? How is that possible? How could such a young peerless expert appear in the beast fighting arena? But look for yourself. The killer bee is like this, and so is Sanguine Ape. Other than being a peerless expert, what other explanation do you have? That's not necessarily true. I heard that there are evil cursemancers in other places. As long as they touch someone's body, they can kill them. Could it be that both the killer bee and Sanguine Ape are cursed? Who knows? It can't be that this is a fake match, right? Even if it's a fake match, it can't be this fake, right? Hearing the heated discussions and suspicions of the audience, the man in black felt somewhat displeased. But he had won after all, and no one could do anything to him. He returned to the VIP seats on the viewing platform. Seeing the displeased man in black return to the VIP seats, the beautiful woman excitedly patted him on the shoulder and said, "You're too strong." These 2 opponents didn't even stay on the field for 2 minutes before they were defeated by you. Ha 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 ha. The man in black shrugged, his expression somewhat displeased. This match is too different from what I imagined. Those 2 were really weak. They couldn't even compare to the opponents I met before. Winning the competition is only one of our goals. We have a bigger goal. Have you forgotten? The beautiful woman advised earnestly. Don't you think so? The man in black's spirits rose, and he nodded. That's right, we have a bigger goal. But this beast fighting arena should be sending someone even stronger up later, right? The previous 2 matches didn't even have the effect of warming up. It's too boring. The beautiful woman reminded him. It looks like the next match won't be that simple. The beautiful woman saw that the brown-haired young man was looking at them, and her eyes revealed a complicated expression. Chapter 192. In fact, everything started on the day of the summer celebration, when those assassins went to the Hero Palace to assassinate Emperor Kaiser Aldrich. The leader of this operation to assassinate the Emperor of the Empire is the little girl we rescued in the Colosseum of Calendar. Her father is Gordon Evans. Gordon Evans was the leader of that night. Even his own flesh and blood was trained to be a warrior from a young age. He was also brought along to carry out the mission of assassinating the Empire's Emperor Keys on the night of the assassination. In the end, the plan was seen through by Marshal Alonso, who arrested all the assassins on the spot and waited for Emperor Kaiser to deal with them. That was the scene where we saved the little girl who was fighting continuously in the Colosseum of Calendar. After that, the little girl was sent to Patini Island. There, she went to find the head of the Mercenary Association, Bollins, and asked for his help under my recommendation. Before the little girl left, she was worried about her father, Gordon Evans, and hoped that we would go to the Empire's prison to rescue him. However, when Avina and I went to the prison to rescue Gordon Evans, we found that he had already been rescued by someone we didn't know. Who was it that saved him? Avina and I secretly investigated for a few days, and we found something we didn't expect. It turned out that Gordon Evans had a younger brother named Gavin Evans, who was now working as a gladiator in the reopened Kellendale Coliseum. Currently, the Kellendale Coliseum was controlled and managed by the Brown family, who controlled the empire's finances. The current successor of the Brown family was a brown-haired young master named Charles. As for the Coliseum, young Master Charles was now the highest official. Of course, the family had also arranged for people to assist him. The little girl's father's younger brother, Gavin Evans, was now working under him. He was an influential person, and he was also known as Black Crow. Charles Brown and his family were staunch supporters of the emperor. In other words, they were staunch supporters of Kaiser the Great's rule. They were also a powerful family in the empire. As for the Emperor Assassins faction, which was the faction that tried to assassinate the emperor, we still didn't know who was behind it. We only knew that Gavin Evans' older brother, the little girl's father, Gordon Evans, was the person in charge of the Emperor Assassins faction that day. Iwena and I investigated and found out that Gordon Evans had a disciple that he was proud of, but we didn't know who he was. We only knew that he didn't participate in the assassination of the Empire's emperor that day, so naturally, he wasn't caught. Thus, Iwena and I could only come to the rebuilt Gallandier Coliseum and secretly investigate some things. We saw that the black-clothed man had defeated 2 people in a row. Ordinary people might not know how he did it, but I saw it clearly. Black Crow Gavin Evans smiled faintly and nodded his head as a greeting to Charles Brown. As for the person next to him, he didn't even glance at them. Obviously, their status was not ordinary. At least in his eyes, he thought that only Charles Brown's status was enough for him to greet him. "Young master, I heard that you were looking for me?" Black Crow's voice was hoarse and low, but it carried a sense of calmness and confidence. Charles Brown pointed at the 2 people lying motionless on the ground, not far from his seat. "Uncle Gavin, please help me look at these 2 people. They fought with the same opponent before and were both knocked out with a single punch. I want to know what happened to that person." "Those 2 are Killer Bee and Sanguine Ape, right? Not everyone can knock them out with a single punch." Hei-Wu walked towards the 2 of them. His steps were slow but powerful. Following that, without seeing how he moved, 2 golden rays of light flashed. 2 cross-shaped cuts appeared on the clothes of the Killer Bee and the Blood Ape, revealing their muscular upper bodies. Gavin's eyes lit up when he saw the same fist print on both of their chests. He squatted down and gently touched the fist print. What a powerful punch, and it's very concentrated. He must be an expert. Charles Brown smiled and asked, "Uncle Gavin, is this guy very powerful?" Black Crow Gavin nodded. "He's not bad. This person's fighting style is very interesting." "Who is this person? Is he a new gladiator?" Charles Brown smiled bitterly. "No, he's a challenger. He came here to have fun. He pissed me off." "Oh." Black Crow Gavin was deep in thought. Although Charles Brown was the heir of the Brown family, he was only in charge of the Kellendale Coliseum. Not only was Black Crow Gavin a top-tier fighter, but he was also one of the most trusted men of the Brown family. That was why he invited Black Crow Gavin to deal with the man in black. In the entire Kellendale Coliseum, only Gavin had the strength to do so. "If that's the case, let's send Bobby the Wild Bear out first. I want to see this guy for myself," Black Crow Gavin said. Time passed in the blink of an eye. As soon as the man in black returned to the arena, before the host could introduce him, a burst of wild laughter came from the opposite side. "Ha ha ha ha, I didn't expect my last opponent to be you. Hee hee kid, you're pretty good." The man in black looked around and saw a tall, fat man walking into the arena with a nonchalant smile. The man in black's eyes suddenly lit up because he knew this guy. It was the famous Bobby the Wild Bear. Bobby the Wild Bear stood not far from the black-clothed man, his chest covered in black hair. He grinned nastily and said, "Brat, I've seen the match just now. You're the most powerful opponent I've met here. But that's what makes it fun. The last match has to be a little more exciting." The man in black's expression finally became serious. He nodded and said, "You're not bad yourself. You're much stronger than the other two guys. I can feel it." Wild Bear Bobby clenched his fists and punched each other forcefully, causing a crisp sound of air exploding. Then, he burst out into laughter. "Ha ha, let's start then. Let the host take a rest. Pay attention, I'm coming." As soon as he finished speaking, Bobby the Wild Bear waved his hands and sent out 2 khaki shockwaves, rushing straight at the man in black. The man in black knew how terrifying his opponent was, so he didn't move at first. It was only when his opponent's shockwaves were about to touch his feet that he jumped high into the air. Although his opponent could change the direction of his shockwaves, the man in black discovered that they didn't change direction in midair. When he saw the shockwaves rushing past him in midair, the man in black didn't even have time to feel happy. Instead, Bobby the Wild Bear laughed and said, "Hee hee hee, do you think you're the first one who thought of jumping? Don't underestimate this move of mine." Explode. Chapter 193. Bang! The shockwave was less than a meter away from the black-clothed man, but it suddenly exploded with Bobby's voice. The flying rocks were like countless concealed weapons as they shot towards the black-clothed man in midair. The black-clothed man's eyes shrunk, clearly not expecting the opponent to be so proficient in controlling the shockwave. However, he was unable to move nimbly in midair, and could only wave his fists, turning them into afterimages as he blocked the rocks. But at this time, Bobby jumped up with a loud shout, his 10 fingers forming a fist as he heavily hammered down on the back of the black-clothed man. The black-clothed man hurriedly swept out with his leg. Although he accurately kicked the opponent's fist, he didn't have enough strength due to the hasty kick, and was heavily hammered to the ground. In the process of falling, the black-clothed man forcibly twisted his waist and flipped his body, finally landing on his feet first and avoiding the embarrassing fall. However, Bobby didn't give him the slightest chance to catch his breath. Another 2 shockwaves came from afar, and at the same time, he somersaulted in midair with an agility that didn't match his body shape. His right fist was wrapped in thick earth element chi as it fiercely smashed towards the back of the black-clothed man, forming a situation where the black-clothed man was surrounded. Facing Bobby's fierce attack, the black-clothed man wasn't alarmed, but instead smiled with an excited expression on his face. After taking a deep breath, he shook his arms, the muscles on his arms bulging as he bent his waist and fiercely smashed the shockwave. After a violent explosion, the shockwave disappeared like a punctured bubble. Afterwards, the black-clothed man changed his fist into a palm, supporting himself on the ground as he tightened his right leg and fiercely shot it out, once again hitting Bobby's fist. But this time, due to the support of the ground, the strength of his leg was sufficient to kick Bobby back a few steps. After repelling his opponent, the black-clothed man took advantage of the momentum to flip back and stand up again. He turned around to look at Bobby, who was also looking at him. Vigorously waving his right hand, Bobby grinned and said, "What great strength, even greater than mine. It's been a long time since someone was able to kick me so painfully. Kid, what's your name?" Similarly revealing a smile, the black-clothed man softly said, "Nick, that's my name. What about you? Don't tell me it's called Wild Bear Bobby?" Pointing his thumb at himself, Wild Bear Bobby raised his voice. "My name is Wild Bear Bobby. I was raised by a wild bear. Remember this name. Soon, this name will spread throughout this city like an earthquake." This was the first time the man in black had heard such a strange analogy. He could not help but laugh. "Ha ha, you're quite interesting. But aren't you worried that I'll interrupt your earthquake?" Wild Bear Bobby grinned hideously and slowly opened his arms. "So, in order to avoid such a situation, I can only bury you in the ground. You are the first opponent here who has forced me to use my full strength. Get ready." Following Wild Bear Bobby's deep roar, his body started to tremble lightly. This was a sign that his entire body was exerting its full strength. Immediately after, a faint yellow radiance slowly lit up from all parts of his body, continuously spreading to his entire body. Soon, Wild Bear Bobby's entire body was enveloped by the yellow radiance, as though he had grown another layer of glowing skin. The dust under his feet surged under the illumination of the yellow radiance, giving off a frightening aura. The black-clothed man's face turned solemn. His opponent's strange transformation made him feel a sense of nervousness. It could be imagined that the following attack would be even more vicious and fierce than before. I haven't used this move much after mastering it. You will be the first person to be defeated by this move. Black-clothed man, right? I'm coming. Boom. A cloud of dust flew around Wild Bear Bobby, covering his enormous body. It was unknown how he did it, but in the next instant, he suddenly appeared behind the black-clothed man, his right fist silently attacking. Although the black-clothed man's attention was mostly attracted by the cloud of dust, his keen sixth sense still allowed him to sense the attack. He hurriedly turned around and raised his arms to block. However, Wild Bear Bobby's strength had increased by quite a bit due to the dust covering his entire body. The powerful impact sent the black-clothed man flying. With a wild laugh, Wild Bear Bobby stamped his right foot on the ground. His entire body melted into the ground like a drop of water falling into the water. Soon after, he appeared in front of the black-clothed man, fiercely swinging his fist. Seeing Wild Bear Bobby melted into the ground, it immediately shocked the entire audience. Many people even cried out in disbelief. Black Crow Gavin was also watching the match. He was observing the black-clothed youth. While Gavin was still in shock, the battle had already reached its climax. Wild Bear Bobby relied on his elusive earth element fusion technique and his increased strength to force the black-clothed man into a defensive position. However, just when everyone thought that Wild Bear Bobby was about to obtain victory, the black-clothed man's speed suddenly increased. His hands and feet emitted white arcs of electricity. His might wasn't inferior to Wild Bear Bobby's. After using his high speed to increase the distance between them, the black-clothed man excitedly looked at Wild Bear Bobby, loudly shouting, "Hey, Wild Bear Bobby, you've been fighting for so long. Isn't it time for me to attack?" Looking cautiously at the black-clothed man, Wild Bear Bobby sneered, "You're bound to lose this match." The black-clothed man smiled as he extended his right hand. The edge of his palm gradually lit up with dazzling white electricity. "Whether or not you can win depends on whether or not you can take this move of mine. Pay attention, it's my turn to attack." Before he could finish his last word, the black-clothed man's figure had already disappeared from where he stood. Under Wild Bear Bobby's shocked gaze, a palm that resembled a lightning blade had already struck his body. What kind of speed is this? It's even faster than that monster called Black Crow. Wild Bear Bobby's heart trembled. Just as this thought appeared in his mind, Wild Bear Bobby felt as if he had been ruthlessly split apart by an incomparably sharp long blade. An irresistible force instantly submerged him, followed by a scorching and intense numbness. Wild Bear Bobby was also struck by the black-clothed man. Not a single drop of blood flowed out from the open wounds, all of it instantly evaporated due to the high temperature. A few seconds later, Wild Bear Bobby fell to the ground with smoke all over his body. His eyes glazed over as he looked at the black-clothed man. He said weakly, "You're really ridiculously strong. Did you hold back just now? I can feel it. Sigh, I really lost face. I was knocked down by you with a single strike." The black-clothed man smiled as he sat beside Wild Bear Bobby. He lightly patted his shoulder and said, "You're also very strong. You gave me a fright just now." Wild Bear Bobby snorted coldly. Wild Bear Bobby snorted as he reluctantly tilted his head and said, "Don't comfort me. A loss is a loss. But you have to pay attention. I saw Hey Woo in the preparation area. I only felt scared when facing him in this arena. That guy is not only powerful, but he has also killed more than one person. Don't show any mercy to him, otherwise you might be killed by him." Because of these words, the black-clothed man's impression of Wild Bear Bobby greatly increased. He nodded with a smile. "Thank you for your reminder. I'll be careful. However, I've been waiting for him." Chapter 194. In the arena, Blackmurk had already entered the preparation area. He wanted to personally face the man in black on the battlefield. At that time, the man in black had won 5 matches in a row, so he wouldn't stop until he had won 5 matches, unless he failed halfway through. After he finished speaking, the man in black looked at the preparation area. He recalled the man with a crow on his shoulder. Would his opponent be him in the next match? When Bobby the Wild Bear was carried out of the Colosseum, the audience applauded and cheered enthusiastically. Everyone felt that this high-level match was worth the ticket price. It turned out that the Killer Bee and Blood Ape weren't fake matches, but were really too weak. They didn't even have the strength to make their opponents take them seriously. At this time, the host finally came on stage. After confirming that the man in black didn't need to rest, the host used his unique voice to shout, "Ladies and gentlemen, you are so lucky today. I haven't seen many matches of this level. But even more lucky things have yet to come. Because the next one to participate in the Colosseum is the fiend we saw before who cut off the opponent's legs, Blackmurk." With that strange smile still on his face, the man in black slowly walked into the Colosseum. The crow on his shoulder didn't make any unpleasant sounds this time. A pair of blood-red eyes stared fiercely at the man in black. It was actually very intelligent. The black-clothed man curiously sized up this crow that was staring at him. He did not underestimate this opponent in front of him at all. The opponent's strange movements and powerful strength made him feel as if he was looking at another version of himself. However, the opponent's ruthlessness was something that he did not possess at the moment. Blackmurk walked to the opposite side of the man in black and shook his shoulder to let the crow fly into the air. Then, he slowly pulled out the 2 uniquely curved iron rods from his back. He crossed the 2 rods and pointed them forward. The man in black also gently exhaled. He leaned his body slightly, raised his left fist, and pulled back his right fist. He was in a ready stance. The 2 of them faced off like this for nearly a minute. Neither of them moved. But suddenly Blackmurk laughed. At the same time, he gently shook his head and said, "You don't have much battle experience, do you?" The black-clothed man frowned slightly. Although he was curious about the other party's question, he still replied, "Yes, I rarely fight with others." "Why, is there a problem?" Black Crow continued to smile. "That's right. I purposely exposed 2 flaws to lure you into attacking, but you didn't move at all. Either you're experienced enough to see that it was a trap, or you're really a rookie. You can tell that the person who taught you cares a lot about you and can't bear to let you fight. You're really lucky." When he said the last sentence, Hei Wu's tone became somewhat sorrowful. Then, he shook his head and said, "When I saw you fighting with that fatty just now, I felt like I saw another version of myself. But why are our fates so different?" The black-clothed man was stunned. He didn't expect Hei Wu to have the same thoughts as him. Both of them saw a shadow of themselves in the other party's battle. Their strange speed and powerful strength were all advantages that made their opponents fearful and troubled. But when 2 people who had the same advantages fought against each other, what kind of exciting battle would happen? The smile on Hei Wu's face gradually turned cold. He walked closer to the black-clothed man while twirling the iron rod in his hand. "Do you know, if someone like you were in my place, you probably wouldn't live for more than a day? Looking at you, I feel like I'm looking at a weaker version of myself. You had the chance to kill your opponent, but you showed mercy. Too stupid." The black-clothed man frowned and didn't explain anything. He only responded with the same cold smile. "Hey, I don't think you're the kind of person who talks so much nonsense. Don't tell me you think you can defeat your opponent with just your mouth? Hei Wu's footsteps paused. A cold light flashed in his eyes. His body emitted wisps of black mist like water vapor, emitting a cold aura. He said indifferently, "Don't worry, you'll soon know the difference between you and me." Whoosh! With the sound of air breaking, Hei Wu arrived in front of the black-clothed man in an instant. His movement was as fast as a ghost. The iron rod in his right hand turned into an afterimage as he fiercely chopped down. Seeing that Hei Wu had finally made his move, the black-clothed man's fighting spirit soared. With confidence in his own strength, he actually blocked Hei Wu's attack with his bare hand. The surface of his fist was surrounded by lightning, and its power was even stronger than Hei Wu's. Bang! A light explosion sounded in the air. Hei Wu was pushed back by this punch. Obviously, the black-clothed man still had the upper hand in terms of strength. However, the black-clothed man's face didn't show any joy at this time. This was because on his left hand that had collided with Hei Wu's attack, a wisp of black air had unknowingly stuck to it. It emitted an evil and cold aura, and gave him an uncomfortable feeling of numbness. With a thought, the black-clothed man increased the power in his hand. With a crackling sound, the wisp of black air was evaporated. Only then did his left hand feel normal again. My attack may not look very overbearing, but it is poisonous and can numb a person's perception. It seems that your lightning do-chi has a certain purification effect, but I don't know how much do-chi you can squander. Seeing Hei Wu's strange smile, the black-clothed man coldly snorted. The tip of his foot lightly touched the ground, and his entire body flew towards his opponent like an arrow leaving the bow. At the same time, the edge of his palm lit up with white light. Hei Wu's pupils shrank, and his entire body tensed up. He had already seen this move before, and its power was simply extraordinary. He also didn't have the confidence to take it head-on, so his entire body dodged to the right like a wisp of smoke. Thus, the two of them staged a tug-of-war in the arena. Every time the black-clothed man got close, Hei Wu would do everything in his power to dodge the lightning strike. He would rather take the opponent's other punch or kick than let the fatal white light touch him. Not long after, the black-clothed man, who had been maintaining his battle state, finally had no choice but to disperse the lightning in his palm. Although the consumption wasn't too great, it wasn't a solution for him to not be able to hit his opponent. This would only continue to waste his do-chi. However, the moment the black-clothed man withdrew his battle state, Hei Wu began to madly counterattack. The two sticks in his hands turned into countless stick shadows, and smashed down like a storm. The black-clothed man focused his mind to block, and finally, his defense was watertight. However, when the two of them separated, the black-clothed man's arms were once again stuck to the black-clothed man's arms. A strong numbness surged up like a tide. The black-clothed man's eyebrows tightly knit together. He once again increased the power, and only then did he manage to purify the air. However, the excessive consumption of do-chi caused his breathing to become slightly hurried. Chapter 195. Blackmerk's eyes lit up. He knew that his strategy had worked. Although his opponent was strong and his do-chi was stronger than him, he was too inexperienced. He did not know how to deal with all kinds of situations. He only knew how to use his do-chi to solve the problem. Blackmerk was able to equalize their strength and even gain the upper hand. Thinking of this, Blackmerk did not give his opponent any time to catch his breath. He swung the two sticks in his hands with all his might, and two crescent-shaped blades that emitted a cold light shot out from the top of the metal stick. The two strangely shaped metal sticks actually turned into two sickles. This was the true form of Blackmerk's weapon. With the two scythes in his hands, Hei Wu immediately leaped up. The blades turned into a strange and unpredictable cold light as they attacked the black-clothed man. The lethality was several times stronger than before. The man in black's face turned serious for the first time. He could only rely on his quick movements to dodge. He was confident that he could take the stick with his bare hands, but now that the stick had turned into a sharp blade, he was not confident that he could take it head-on without using his ultimate move. Thus, the scene of you chasing me and I running away played out once again, but the roles were reversed. Charles Brown sat in the VIP seats and watched the battle with great interest. He smiled and said to himself, "It seems that this black-haired kid is only SOSO. Blackmerk Gawain can easily kill him." Blackmerk's battle experience was not on the same level as the black-haired kid. If there were no accidents, he should win. In fact, the black-haired kid was stronger than him in terms of strength. There were many examples of the weak defeating the strong in the gladiator arena. It was nothing strange. A battle was a competition of strength, tactics, and even a little luck. The black-haired kid seemed to be a little stronger than Blackmerk. If he met an opponent who was much weaker than him, he would be able to crush them. However, if he met an opponent who was on the same level as him, his weakness would be exposed. This was how it was on the battlefield. Perhaps a small mistake could lead to a collapse. In the arena, the battle between the man in black and Blackmerk had become a tug-of-war. Relying on his faster speed, the man in black slowly got used to the rhythm of the battle. He began to accumulate his stamina. The do-chi and stamina that were consumed earlier were quickly and steadily recovering. Previously, he was almost unable to fight back, but now he was able to fight back. During this period of battle, he had discovered many small tricks. For example, Hei Wu's strange poisonous black gas required a large amount of electricity to purify it. But now, the man in black seemed to have mastered a kind of balance, and the amount of electricity required to purify the black gas was decreasing. Furthermore, he discovered that although Hei Wu's movements were erratic and hard to see with the naked eye, his instantaneous speed was much slower than his. It was with this advantage that he was able to catch his breath. This battle was indeed very important to the man in black. It allowed him to gain a lot of valuable combat experience. It could be said that Blackmerk was like an actual combat teacher. He used all of his strength to force and urge the man in black to grow quickly. However, compared to the man in black who was getting more and more energetic, Blackmerk was getting colder and colder. His opponent's do-chi was not only very strong, but his recovery speed was also very fast. Blackmerk felt that if he continued to fight like this, he would be the one to exhaust his do-chi in the end. This monster, how did he train? Not only is his do-chi, but his stamina is also much stronger than ordinary people. With his recovery speed, he will surpass me again in 5 minutes. No, a long battle is not good for me. I have to end it quickly. After cursing in his heart, Blackmerk made a feint and then somersaulted a few times to increase the distance between him and the man in black. Since he had the upper hand, it was easy for him to retreat. Seeing Blackmerk suddenly retreat, the man in black was stunned. He frowned and said, "Hey, why did you stop fighting? Are you tired? I can let you rest for a while." Blackmerk was angered by the man in black's words and laughed. "Haha, you monster. Don't look down on people. I just changed my mind and wanted to show you something interesting." The man in black raised his eyebrows and asked curiously, "What interesting thing?" Slowly standing up, Blackmerk revealed a sinister smile. "Don't worry, it's starting now." After saying this, Blackmerk's eyes suddenly widened. The black mist that surrounded his body also spread out at the same time. Moreover, its color gradually turned into a dark red like viscous blood. "I can see that you are very confident in your speed. Now let's see if your speed can help you escape from this move of mine." The dark red blood mist that was spreading out seemed to have a life of its own as it crazily twisted after Blackmerk's voice. Moreover, the speed at which it spread out became even faster. In just a few seconds, it had completely wrapped Blackmerk and the man in black, forming a huge fog cocoon. It also emitted a nauseating bloody smell that filled the entire arena. Seeing this scene, the entire audience suddenly lost their voices and screamed. Even the beautiful women on the stage stood up nervously and began to worry about the man in black in the fog cocoon. However, the man in black who was wrapped in the fog cocoon felt as if he had been transferred to another scene. The scenery around him was filled with black and red. It was incomparably dark, causing his vision to be greatly affected. Moreover, his entire body became heavy and sticky, as if he had been soaked in a swamp. The most uncomfortable thing was that extremely strong bloody smell, as if it could penetrate his skin and enter his body through his pores. Just as the man in black carefully observed the situation around him, Blackmerk's voice seemed to come from all directions. "Why aren't you running anymore? Why don't you try and see if you can still display the speed that you are so proud of in my blood river hell?" The man in black kept looking around, but he could not find the source of the voice at all. He was shocked. Blackmerk's confident laughter was still lingering in his ears. Inside the fog cocoon, boundless murderous intent was born. A series of rumbling sounds like muffled thunder continued to expand. Following that, the man in black's cautious eyes flashed with a look of horror. Because right in front of him, a blood wave that was at least 6 meters tall appeared out of thin air and slammed down on his head. The man in black immediately used thundering shadow footwork to dodge backward. However, in this place, his speed was greatly restricted. Moreover, the blood wave's range was too wide. Without any other choice, the man in black could only use his ultimate move again, bracing himself to slash at the blood wave. How is this possible? In this place where there is no water, he can actually condense so many blood waves to attack. Even with a domain, it is very difficult to do this. Could it be an illusion? The man in black, Nick, was bitterly thinking of a way to break out. He did not want to die here like this. In fact, he knew this Blackmerk. This person was his master's blood brother. Today, he came to compete with this enemy of the Emperor faction. He did not want to lose face for his master. Chapter 196. It really is an illusion. My guess was right. Even a true expert would need a period of time to form their own domain. How could this black crow form such a large blood wave in such a short time? Brandishing his fist, the black-clothed man Nick was so excited that he almost wanted to shout. After all, this was the first time he truly saw through an opponent's attack and counterattack. It was a great encouragement to him. After Black Crow was kicked to the ground by Nick, he immediately felt a sharp pain in his upper body. Even a few of his teeth were loose, as if they would fall out with a light touch. Fortunately, he had received very strict training since he was young, and pain tolerance was one of the most important lessons. After taking a few deep breaths to relieve the pain, Black Crow stood up and glared at Nick with a pale face. "I still underestimated you. You actually saw through my illusion." The black-clothed man Nick laughed. "This is all thanks to an opponent I met. He was very good at illusions like yours and made me suffer a great loss." "Humph. If that's the case, then let's fight with our true abilities." After a cold snort, Black Crow knelt on one knee and fiercely stabbed the scythe in his hands into the ground. At the same time, both of his palms pressed against the ground. In an instant, the entire fog cocoon began to rapidly wriggle. Under the control of an invisible force, the blood mist formed nearly 100 sharp blood spikes. They suddenly shot out from all directions and attacked Nick. This wave of attacks was no longer an illusion. Although the black-clothed man Nick immediately used Thunder Shadow to evade, but unfortunately, his speed was greatly suppressed within this fog cocoon. Although he dodged and blocked most of the blood thorns, there were still a few that pierced him. Fortunately, his skin was thick and he dodged in time. Most of the wounds were just scratches, and the few that did pierce into his flesh weren't too deep, so it didn't affect his movement too much. After putting some distance between himself and Hei-Wu, the black-clothed man, Nick, looked at Hei-Wu with a serious expression. He thought to himself, I really can't let my excitement and carelessness get to my head so easily in a battle. This move is too annoying. Although the Black Crow can't be maintained forever, the longer I stay here, the greater the danger I'll be in. I have to break out of this place. I don't know how thick this place is, but I have to get rid of this Black Crow as soon as possible. Thinking up to this point, the black-clothed man, Nick, clenched his teeth and his right hand suddenly lit up with a large amount of white electric arcs. However, this time, the electric arcs didn't concentrate on the outside of his palm. Instead, they formed a white ball of lightning in his palm. After this ball of lightning was formed, the white light almost illuminated the entire cocoon. Hei-Wu hurriedly covered his eyes with his arms in shock. If he was outside the cocoon, he would see that the entire cocoon was illuminated by the white light from the inside out. It was like a lantern, very beautiful. Not good, he actually still has such a dense do-chi. Moreover, this move is much stronger than the previous one. I'm afraid I won't be able to block this attack. I'll have to use my full strength. Hei-Wu's battle experience was very rich. He immediately realized that this move of Nick's wasn't something his false domain could block. Anxious, he circulated all of his do-chi and condensed all of the blood mist together, forming a blood spear in front of him that was as thick as his body. As long as I block this attack, that brat is finished. This kind of move isn't something that can be casually used. Fiercely biting his lips, Hei-Wu held the blood spear with both of his hands. He raised his arms high and used all of his strength to throw the blood spear. The blood spear was like a giant ballista that shot out to siege a city. It made a sharp whistling sound as it flew towards Nick. If this attack hit, it wouldn't just pierce through, it would split Hei-Wu in half. At this moment, Nick's eyes were shining with white light, as if a giant bolt of lightning was about to burst out of his body. The electric ball in his hand was accompanied by a muffled roar as he fiercely swung it out and smashed the tip of the blood spear. Boom! Everyone in the arena heard a loud sound of thunder at the same time. Many people even let out screams. Under everyone's gaze, the fog cocoon in the arena was like an egg that fell to the ground and broke into pieces. Then, a large area of white electric arcs appeared, making sinister crackling sounds that made people's hearts tremble in fear. Immediately after, a figure was thrown into the air by the airflow. After drawing a parabola in the air, it heavily smashed into the ground and shook up a cloud of dust. After the dust settled, this figure's black clothes and black pants were revealed. After Hei-Wu fell to the ground, his originally pale face flushed red. Finally, he couldn't help but tilt his body and spit out a large mouthful of blood. Then, he laid on the ground dispiritedly and didn't even have the strength to stand up. When the electric arcs and dust gradually dissipated, the black-clothed man, Nick, slowly walked out from the center of the fog cocoon. His face was tired, but his eyes were shockingly bright. Hei-Wu stared at the black-clothed man, Nick, who was slowly walking towards him. He only laughed when Nick was right in front of him. Then, he lay down on his back and laughed softly. Hee you win. I didn't think that I would lose to a rookie like you. Come, kill me. You probably haven't killed anyone before, right? I should be the first. The black-clothed man, Nick, frowned and said, Kill you? Why would I kill you? I didn't come here to kill you. Hei-Wu, do you know who my master is? A strange look flashed across Hei-Wu's eyes. He didn't want to know who the black-clothed man's master was. He mocked, You might regret it if you don't kill me. Are you sure? The black-clothed man, Nick, shrugged and said, I don't know if I'll regret it. I only know that I don't want to kill you now. I hope that we can fight again in the future. Whether you believe it or not, I'm very grateful to you. I've learned a lot from fighting you. I just want to tell you that for my master, I must defeat you. I'm here to defeat you today in hopes that you can repent and be saved. You're not a bad person. Don't go down a dark path. After he finished speaking, the black-clothed man, Nick, turned his head and waved in the direction of the preparation area, indicating for someone to carry Hei Wu away. However, at this moment, Hei Wu, who was lying on the ground, quickly pulled out a dagger from his trousers. He suddenly flipped over, raised the dagger, and stabbed towards the black-clothed man, Nick's back. "Black-clothed man, Nick, watch out behind you!" At this moment, the beautiful woman's urgent cry sounded. The black-clothed man, Nick, was stunned and felt a chill coming from behind him. However, it was too late to dodge. He could only try his best to avoid being hit in his vital parts. However, when the dagger was about to pierce his shoulder, a trace of hesitation appeared in Hei Wu's eyes. Chapter 197. The dagger slightly changed its direction in midair, only grazing the black-clothed man's arm, leaving behind a shallow wound. "Who do you think you are? You're just like someone I know. You're just as annoying as him. Too bad you managed to dodge it. I told you before that you'll regret it if you don't kill me. Are you sure you don't want to kill me now?" The black-clothed man, Nick, covered the wound on his arm. After a glance, he knew that it wasn't a big deal. He then turned to look at Hei Wu with a bewildered expression. He asked hesitantly, "You? Why did you do this?" Black Merc sneered and said sarcastically, "Newbie, didn't you learn a lot from me? This is the last thing I'll teach you. Don't be careless unless you're sure your enemy is dead or has lost all ability to fight. Otherwise, you'll pay the price with your life." Nick nodded with a serious expression. "Thank you, I'll remember that. But that's not what I'm asking. You must have stabbed the dagger askew on purpose. Otherwise, my wound wouldn't be so light. Why did you do that?" Surprise appeared in Black Merc's eyes. He didn't expect Nick to ask this question. He couldn't help but smile disdainfully. "You're so naive. I didn't have enough strength, so I stabbed the dagger askew. Cut the crap. Are you going to kill me or not? This is your last chance." Nick shook his head with a smile. "You're such a weirdo. Looks like your body is more honest than your mouth. What's your real name? Don't tell me you're called Black Merc? Do you still remember your name?" Black Merc looked at Nick in shock. He didn't expect him to say something like that. But when he realized he had lost his composure, he immediately turned his head away and didn't say anything else. At this time, 2 strong men carrying a stretcher arrived on the field. The 2 strong men carried Black Merc onto the stretcher and walked out of the field. When the stretcher passed by Nick, Black Merc whispered, "My name is Gavin Evans. I'm Gordon Evans' younger brother." Nick opened his mouth and revealed his white teeth. His smile was as bright as the sun. "My name is Nick. I'm Gordon Evans' disciple." A faint smile appeared on Hei Wu's face as he said in a low voice, "I knew it, idiot rookie. You are indeed very similar to my brother. I should have guessed it long ago." Nick watched Black Merc leave the arena. He finally felt a wave of fatigue. Black Merc was the strongest opponent he'd ever met. In order to defeat him, he had to use his ultimate move. But he was still human after all. Any human would feel fatigue, not to mention in such an intense battle. At the same time, he finally achieved his purpose of coming here. A sense of relief filled his heart. At the same time, the host walked up to the arena again. He clapped and shouted excitedly, "Amazing! It's really amazing! Although we didn't see what happened in the strange cocoon, it's still the most exciting match I've ever seen. Everyone, what do you think?" Thunderous applause and cheers came from the audience. The host walked to Nick with a smile and asked, "So, this powerful gladiator, do you choose to continue the battle or to end it? If you choose to end it, we can announce the end of the match. But if you choose to continue the battle, the prize money will be tripled." Nick smiled bitterly, "Then I'll end it. I'm really a little tired." The host laughed, "Of course. The first 2 matches don't count. But Grizzly Bear and Black Merc are both powerful opponents. It's normal for you to feel tired. Then, you'll get the original prize money." When Nick returned to the VIP seats, the beautiful woman rushed up and hugged him excitedly. "You always surprise me. What did you eat growing up? How did you become so powerful?" The man in black, Nick, laughed as he sat down on a chair with the help of the beautiful woman. He let out a long sigh and said, "Miss, are you praising me or insulting me? Didn't I accomplish my goal and learn some combat experience?" The beautiful woman nodded. "I see. But your idea is really unique. I can't believe you came here to learn combat experience. But it seems like the effect is not bad." Nick closed his eyes, and a satisfied smile appeared on his face. "It's not just not bad. I think this decision is really wise." At this time, the beautiful woman was a little dissatisfied. "I say, you're too careless. Black Merc even attacked you after he fell to the ground. I think you went too easy on him. You can't do this in the last match." Nick laughed. "Beautiful woman, that Black Merc isn't a bad person. I can feel it. I don't think we'll be enemies in the future. Our goal is to persuade him to turn over a new leaf." The beautiful woman snorted. "If such a despicable person isn't an enemy, then why would he be a friend? All right, you should get some rest. At least your life isn't in danger." After everything was over, Nick felt a sense of relief. However, he soon realized that there were many things waiting for him to do. His master, Gordon Evans, was currently heavily injured, and his strength was much weaker than before. He had to shoulder this responsibility. During the assassination attempt on Kaiser the Great on the night of the summer celebration, his master had arranged for him to carry out another mission. Now, he had to avenge his master. After all, this empire had existed for hundreds of thousands of years. Even if it had fallen, how could the assassin the Emperor's faction be able to shake it so quickly? Even if the assassin the Emperor's faction had the support of a big shot behind the scenes, it would still be difficult for them to contend against the colossus that was the German Empire. It seems that haste makes waste. In order to overthrow the tyrannical rule of Kaiser the Great, he had to do it step by step. Avina and I were watching everything from the stands of the Kellendale Coliseum. We knew that this black-clothed man wasn't simple. It was very likely that he had the clues we needed. We decided to observe him in secret. Who knows, we might be able to find some clues. After we're done here, Avina and I will leave this place and head to the south. There, we will find all the answers. Wings of Destruction, Black Dragon Ear Deal. Chapter 198. The man in black, Nick, chose to leave the Kellendale Coliseum after defeating Blackbird. He felt there was no point in continuing the competition. "Miss Ada, I wonder if that Charles will make things difficult for us after we leave this place." Nick knew very well that the Blue family behind Charles was a staunch supporter of the Emperor. They controlled a lot of financial power in the Empire. They had no choice. They were now the biggest beneficiaries of Kaiser the Great's rule. "I'm not sure, but let's just let nature take its course. I guess they're still afraid of my father's identity," said the beautiful woman. Her name was Ada Thomas. Her father, Andre Thomas, used to be a valiant general who fought alongside Theoden the Great. However, he was now old and no longer fit to lead troops. He was now a relatively big noble with the title of Count. He also went to the Hero Palace on the day of the summer celebration. He was one of the few people who survived. Now that the situation in the Empire had changed, the reputation of the people of the Church had plummeted because of the revenge of the Witch Council. They could only act in a low-key manner. Even the previous vigorous witch hunt could only be carried out in secret. Many people in the Empire didn't really trust the Church. Alonso, on the other hand, had sent people to stabilize the situation in the imperial capital of Galandir. The reopening of the Colosseum was one of the reasons. At the same time, he was actively contacting his family members. The Blackstone Fortress, which guarded the throat of the north, was his foundation and also the only barrier for the Delman Empire to resist the barbarians in the north. If the Blackstone Castle existed, the Empire would exist. If the Blackstone Castle died, the Empire would die. As for the chief magic consultant of the Empire, Morse, he didn't care about current affairs. He focused on his own affairs. Kaiser the Great acquiesced and supported him greatly. As for Kaiser the Great himself, he reduced his chances of communicating with the outside world. After all the things that had happened, it would only increase his risk. He wanted to bring all his pleasures to the Hero Palace. He was more strict and focused on safety. He only wanted to drink himself to death and enjoy life. He believed that life should be enjoyed while it lasted. He wanted to pursue both material and spiritual bliss. Avina and I, the black-clothed man, Nick, and the beautiful woman, Ada. After an investigation, we finally found out that this black-clothed man, Nick, was the disciple of the little girl's father, Gordon Evans. This Gordon was saved by his younger brother, Hey Woo. Currently, Gordon was living in Miss Ada's manor. It turned out that the mastermind behind Gordon's assassination of Kaiser the Great was Miss Ada's father, Andre. Now that Andre was old, the hair on both sides of his temples had already turned white. However, what was difficult to erase with the passage of time was the dignified temperament of this veteran who had been on the battlefield for a long time. This was the kind of perseverance and vicissitudes of life that could only be obtained after experiencing many life and death situations and crawling out from piles of corpses. A commander like Alonso, who was young and full of vigor, did not possess such a temperament. In the south of Calendir, there was a huge manor quietly sitting there. It was as peaceful as a century-old man. On an empty field in the manor, there was a simple stone table. On both sides of the stone table, there were 2 stone stools. On the stools sat 2 men. One of them was the little girl's father, Gordon Evans, and the other was Count Andre Thomas. The old Count and Gordon sat together. However, after experiencing this incident, Gordon's body was not as good as before. Even his spirit was tired. I wonder how that brat Nick is doing. This time, I don't know why my younger brother went to the Empire's dungeon to save me. I just pity that daughter. Gordon Evans sighed as he spoke. Pull yourself together. I heard that your daughter has been saved by 2 powerful strangers. Her life should not be in danger. As for why your brother betrayed those bastards who supported the Emperor, it is very likely that he still has a conscience. When your disciple Nick returns, perhaps we will know the answer. Count Andre Thomas patted Gordon's shoulder. The 2 of them chatted as they picked up their wine glasses and took a sip. At this moment, Ada and Nick returned to the manor in the south of the city. They saw Andre Thomas and Gordon. "Master, we are back," Nick reported to his master. His master had suffered too much torture in the Empire's dungeon and his body had become very weak. "It's good that you are back." Gordon was very happy to see his disciple return. "You are back. Hurry up and tell me about the situation in the Beast Arena today. Did the Emperor's Brown family make things difficult for you?" Andre said to the 2 children. He did not look like an old man at all. His body was very healthy. When Avina and I, who were hiding in the dark, saw this scene, I knew that the little girl's father was safe and sound. I also knew who had saved him. We were relieved. It seemed that there was no need for us to do anything. Count Andre Thomas would definitely settle them down. We had to hurry and prepare to head to the south to look for the Wing of Destruction, Black Dragoneer deal. We had already wasted too much time. The current conflict and situation in the German Empire could not be changed just by saving or killing someone. Everything was related to each other. Everyone was just a chess piece. After Avina and I packed up, we headed to the south of the Empire. In the north, the 4 witches of the Witch Council arrived in the Kingdom of Northland. When they first arrived, they were still in a sorry state and had yet to recover from the shock. However, witches were still witches. They quickly settled down in the kingdom of Northland and met with the king of the Northland, King Gravel, in the famous Eagle Castle. King Gravel summoned them because he wanted to recruit talented people. He wanted to gather all the available forces to prepare for his plan. Ever since the successful invasion of the German Empire's Port Pruslin, the kingdom of Northland obtained a huge amount of wealth. This also increased their strength by more than a little. Their ambition to invade the empire also started at this time. Gravel attached great importance to the airships, magic crystal cannons, the empire's battleships and other technologies that he brought back. He knew that the Northland people fought bravely. If he could give these equipment to the Northland people, they would be like a tiger that had grown wings. Take the matter of the Witch Council for example. Gravel's intelligence personnel in Kellendil had also reported their battle results to King Gravel. Naturally, King Gravel did not dare to neglect them. Chapter 199. At this moment in the north, the kingdom of Northland, the whole country was full of fighting spirit, and the atmosphere of striving for progress was everywhere. The merchants transported their goods to various places, the farmers worked hard, the soldiers trained hard, and even the nobles and ministers were busy with their own work. The wealth and technology brought back changed the lives of every Northland citizen. People were united, motivated, and fair in their rewards and punishments, giving everyone hope and motivation in life. They all had a common enemy, and that was the Derman of the Empire. They had to continue to develop and grow, and one day they would be able to compete with the Empire. Wearing a golden mask and a black cloak, Claudia's black hair naturally fell to her shoulders. She was very beautiful. Nicella and Serena, this pair of buffoons, had two attributes, one ice and one fire. Their daily routine was to argue, which added a lot of fun to everyone. As for Sevilla, she did not hold a magic wand or wear a magician's robe. She wore a green dress, looking like a pure, calm, and dignified noble lady. She was completely different from the pair of buffoons, Nicella and Serena. It was such a strange combination of four. They were the Witch Council. At the most critical time, they were rescued by strangers and teleported to the town of Boheap outside the city of Kellendil. They fled all the way to the north to avoid the pursuit of the church. After arriving in the kingdom of Northland, they quickly settled down with their abilities and were soon summoned by King Gravel. King Gravel summoned them to Eagle Castle because he had long heard of their names in the intelligence reports. On the other hand, he felt that they were very powerful. If they could be used by the kingdom, it would be a joyous thing. At this time, the hall of Eagle Castle was brightly lit. It was neither too hot nor too cold. The summer temperature in the north was much colder than in the Empire. The four beautiful women, led by the Northland guards, came to the hall of Eagle Castle. The guards at the door questioned them and checked that they did not carry any weapons with them, and then let them in to see King Gravel. King Gravel was sitting on the throne. At this moment, he was sitting there alone, reading a book. There was no one else here. Under the lead of the masked Crocia, the other three witches followed the Northland etiquette and bowed to King Gravel. King Gravel did not put on any airs and immediately asked them to come forward and have lunch with him. The four witches did not decline. After all, it was close to noon, and it was not a bad idea to have lunch with King Gravel in the famous Eagle Castle. Just like that, the five of them chatted as they ate. King Gravel looked at the golden-masked Crocia with a strange expression. He was very curious. Didn't Crocia feel uncomfortable wearing this mask? Your Majesty, do you have any questions? Seeing that King Gravel was looking at her strangely, Crocia asked. Nothing, I just feel that you don't feel uncomfortable wearing a mask when eating? King Gravel was also very straightforward, and did not think too much about it. There are very scary scars on my face, so it is inconvenient for me to show them. I hope your Majesty can forgive me. Crocia said. It's fine, I was just curious. But I'm sorry, I shouldn't have reminded you of this. Gravel felt that he had made the atmosphere a little awkward. Your Majesty, since the scars have already formed, I can only get used to it. Crocia replied. Oh right, I heard that you turned Kellendil upside down. I also feel very happy and admire you. I wonder if you are willing to stay on my side and be the magic consultants of the Kingdom of Northland? Gravel went straight to the point. At this moment, the long table was already filled with food and exquisite silverware. However, the food of the Kingdom of Northland, even if it was the king's banquet, was far from the Empire's. Whether it was the variety, the level of cooking, or the ingredients, it could not be compared to the Empire's. However, Serena was eating very happily. She was eating a roasted lamb leg that was almost as big as her face. On the other hand, Nikela was eating the sweet. On the other hand, Sevia was eating some vegetarian food. It was clear that the difference between the three was very big. As King Gravel spoke, he stuffed a juicy fruit into his mouth and chewed it. He looked at Crocia, hoping that she would give him a satisfactory answer. Your Majesty Gravel, for the time being, we do not have any plans to be the magic consultants of the Kingdom of Northland. If we did, we would naturally come to you. We came here not only to avoid the pursuit of the church, but also to tell you some news, Crocia said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner. Oh? What news? King Gravel looked at the four mysterious witches with great interest. He had developed a strong interest in them. Although he did not know these witches well, he knew that they would not harm him because they had a common enemy, and that was the German Empire and the Church. The enemy of an enemy was a friend. After the meal, King Gravel asked them to stay in the Eagle Castle. There were many luxurious rooms and maids here. If they stayed here, they would not have to worry about food and clothing. They would also be allowed to do their own research, as long as it did not harm the interests of the Kingdom of Northland. However, all of these were rejected by Crocia. Nikela was originally looking forward to such a life. She was a little disappointed, but she obeyed Crocia's decision, just as she had always done. At the same time, in order to express her gratitude for King Gravel's affectionate hospitality, Crocia said that she was a dream teller. She could help the king with some divination and predict the future, if King Gravel needed it. King Gravel thought for a moment. He really did need some guidance about the future. He asked Crocia what to do and when to start. Crocia told him that it was actually very simple to perform a divination. All he needed was a bed, but this bed had to be the bed that the person who wanted to know the prophecy had slept on. He only needed to write down what he wanted to ask in advance on a piece of paper. When the time came, he would burn the paper in front of Crocia. Then, Crocia would inhale the smoke into her body and lie down on the bed to sleep. When Crocia awoke, she would tell His Majesty Gravel all the future she had foreseen in her dream, and all the doubts she had written on that paper. As for when they could perform the divination, Crocia said that since they had nothing to do in the afternoon, they could perform the divination right now. It just depended on King Gravel's convenience. Chapter 200. Just like that, King Gravel agreed to Crocia's divination. He wrote down his plans for the future in Northland on a piece of parchment. Once everything was ready, he lit the parchment in front of Crocia. Soon, the parchment turned into a wisp of green smoke. Crocia took a deep breath and inhaled the smoke into her lungs through her golden mask. Crocia didn't cough. If it had been someone else who had inhaled so much smoke, they would have long since started coughing. Soon, Crocia lay down on King Gravel's bed and fell asleep within moments. Nikela, Serena, and Sevia stood guard by Crocia's bedside. This wasn't the first time they'd seen Crocia use her ability to divine dreams. As the divination continued, Crocia tossed and turned on the bed, looking like she was in great pain. King Gravel looked at her from the side, feeling a little worried. Finally, after half an afternoon, Crotia opened her eyes. King Gravel immediately went to greet her and asked how she was. The other 3 witches also looked at Crotia with concern. I saw many mercenaries, grassland cavalrymen, and even knights of the church. I saw His Majesty leading the defeated soldiers and being chased by the Empire's troops, almost losing his life. I also saw a map, and then there was the raging fire of Blackstone Castle. The raging fire would devour everything. All of this was merely a game of the Grim Reaper, and no one could escape from it. Crotia finished speaking in one breath, the scene she encountered in her dream. After hearing this, King Gravel was speechless for a long time. He knew that he'd gotten the answers he wanted to know, but the last few sentences were too ambiguous. He could hear that it was a bad omen, but on second thought, perhaps everything was already destined. He just had to be himself. Just like that, King Gravel knew what would happen next. It was similar to what he'd expected, so no matter what the outcome was, he had to give it his all. Originally, King Gravel wanted to have the 4 witches stay for dinner, but since Crotia insisted on going back, King Gravel didn't force her to stay. The next day, according to plan, King Gravel summoned Helen, who had been following him all this time. Helen had always been his butler and one of his most trusted people. Thinking of this, he thought of Tawny. Unfortunately, he'd already returned to the embrace of God. When Gravel summoned Helen, Helen knew that something important must have happened. Sure enough, Gravel told Helen that he was going to send someone to the Grassland Kingdom in the west, the Kurut Kingdom. He also told Helen that Helen was the candidate for the position of Foreign Affairs Minister. Hybul was taken aback. He didn't expect Gravel to give him such an important task. It was enough to show how much Gravel trusted and valued him. Helen was very happy. He didn't expect that at his age, he could still make his own contribution to this newly established independent country. At the same time, he was a little worried that he wasn't up to the task. However, Gravel trusted Helen very much and said that he had already arranged for the people to set off tomorrow. He also said that he had prepared a very meaningful gift for the Khan of Kurut and asked Helen to personally deliver it to the Khan of Kurut. Gravel said that Helen would represent the Kingdom of Northland and represent him, King Gravel, to form an alliance with the Grassland Kingdom. As a newly established country, the Kingdom of Northland naturally had a lot of diplomatic trifles to deal with. As the Foreign Affairs Minister of the Kingdom of Northland, Helen was now fully immersed in his role. He took the goods all the way to the west, going through all kinds of hardships and dangers, crossing the towering mountains and entering the Grassland Kingdom, the Kurut Kingdom. Now, he had arrived at the city of Lalma in the Kurut Kingdom. Amidst a group of strong warriors, he slowly walked into the great hall of the Kurut Kingdom's Khan. The capital of the Kurut Kingdom was called Lalma. The strongest warriors of the grassland lived here, and the fattest cattle and sheep of the grassland were reared here. In fact, it had been a long time since an envoy from the south came to Lalma to negotiate. After the Kurut Kingdom fell into a civil war, the Kurut Kingdom no longer had the ability to harass the German Empire. They could only plunder some things in the desert before returning to their grassland. The barren grasslands had no ore or resources, so they could only live in the north. The reason why the German Empire didn't go north to destroy the Kurut Kingdom was because they were too poor and didn't care for that barren land. Another reason was that the Empire was now in a mess and couldn't support a northern expedition. However, King Gravel didn't think that the Kurut Kingdom was useless. He felt that it could at least provide him with livestock, cotton and other raw materials. It was a good natural ally to form an alliance with. So he sent Helen, a veteran who had followed him to this day, in hopes that he could complete the treaty between the Kingdom of Northland and the Kurut Kingdom, forming a strategic partnership between the two countries. The Kingdom of Northland could use the Kurut Kingdom as a dumping ground for goods, while the Kurut kingdom could export raw materials to the kingdom of Northland in exchange for more daily necessities. This was definitely a win-win business, so King Gravel didn't think that the other side would refuse such an alliance. The kingdom of Northland really had too many daily necessities of the Kurut kingdom. Not only that, they also had a common enemy, the German Empire. In the past 2 months, the Kurut kingdom was extremely dependent on the salt that the kingdom of Northland exported to the Kurut kingdom. Including ironware and some other things, the kingdom of Northland's economic invasion and control of the Kurut kingdom was greater than at any time in history. Seru leaned back in his chair and looked down at Helen, who walked in. He didn't seem to have any intention of speaking. Beside him, a minister dressed in a long robe looked at Highbull. He dragged his voice and pretended to be dignified as he asked, "You, the envoy from the east, what are you here for?" "I'm here to form an alliance with the Kurut kingdom." Helen introduced himself. "On behalf of the kingdom of Northland, I'm here to convey the will of eternal peace. We've always been at peace." On the other side, a general with a saber at his waist mocked in a repulsive tone. The surrounding generals of the Kurut kingdom laughed. They had to go west several times a year, and their main target was the desert kingdom of Haruz. Chapter 201. I am here on behalf of King Gravel of the Kingdom of Northland, and I have come with great sincerity. If the Kurut kingdom is not willing to coexist peacefully with us, then I will leave immediately. Highbull looked at the generals of the Kurut kingdom with contempt and said coldly. His words angered many of the fierce generals, but before they could retaliate, the robed minister spoke first. "We have always abided by the treaty, and peace is what we desire. However, our treaty seems to have been signed with the German Empire, not the Kingdom of Northland. The Kingdom of Northland is now the only legitimate regime in the north," Highbull argued. "Although the Kurut kingdom lost the treaty back then, we still have tens of thousands of cavalry ready for battle." The minister flaunted his military strength and threatened Highbull. In his view, the Kingdom of Northland was the best target for plundering. They had salt, cloth, ironware, and all sorts of other wonderful things. If he could snatch these things, it would greatly alleviate the poverty of the Kurut kingdom. Highbull smiled and asked, "Then, if one day the Kingdom of Northland came to the grasslands to hunt, would the Kurut kingdom welcome them?" "How dare you?" A general wanted to step forward with his long sword, but he was stopped by the minister with a look. The other generals who wanted to step forward saw the expression on the minister's face and suppressed their urge to go on a rampage. After the minister stopped the general who stepped forward, he took 2 steps forward and looked at Highbull. "Actually, I really want to know, on what basis you dare to cross the mountain range and talk about the treaty with us." Hearing this, Highbull grinned. He looked at Seru Khan, who was still sitting on the throne, and requested, "Since you want to see our strength, I will first bring up the gift our king gave to your majesty." The minister frowned, then nodded and agreed to Highbull's request. Soon, 2 soldiers of the Kingdom of Northland carried a small wooden box and walked to Highbull's side. They opened the wooden box and revealed a long object inside. No one present could recognize this object, but it had a famous name in the Kingdom of Northland, Glory's Fury. This was a crossbow that the Kingdom of Northland had copied from the crossbow seized from the German Empire. Highbull reached out and took out the brand-new crossbow from the box. He pulled the bowstring clumsily and put a crossbow bolt into the groove. Then, he aimed at a pillar in the distance and pulled the trigger. Bang! After a crisp sound, all the guards and generals were so frightened that they drew their swords and wanted to stop Highbull, who was holding a dangerous weapon. However, Highbull put the weapon back into the box and looked contemptuously at the generals of the Kurut kingdom, who only knew how to show off their bravery. This is the Glory's Fury developed by the Kingdom of Northland. The king asked me to give it to your majesty. As Hybel spoke, he pointed at the crossbow in the box and said, If the Kuruth kingdom is willing to form an alliance with us, then whether it is iron, cloth, salt, or the like, we will provide you with sufficient supplies. We will not skimp on them. If the Kuruth kingdom insists on fighting with the kingdom of Northland, then the soldiers of the kingdom of Northland equipped with this weapon will welcome your majesty's brave warriors. After saying this, Hybel waved his hand. The 2 soldiers of the kingdom of Northland put down the box and turned to leave. They did not even look at the sharp swords around them. The strong Seru Khan finally stood up from his throne. His body was as burly as a wall. He stepped on the soft wool carpet and walked to Hybel's side before saying, You had the chance to kill me just now. If your majesty insists on becoming enemies with the kingdom of Northland, there are too many soldiers of the kingdom of Northland who can shoot better than me. Hybel did not back down. He stared into Seru Khan's eyes and retorted. Seru Khan bent down and took out the crossbow from the box. He handed it to Hybel and said, One more time. I was too far away to see clearly. After taking the crossbow from Seru Khan, Hybel pulled the bolt and reloaded it. He then handed it back to Seru Khan. The burly Seru Khan took the loaded crossbow and listened to Hybel's explanation. Then, he raised his rifle and assumed a shooting posture. He pointed the black muzzle at Hybel, who was still standing there. Pull this thing called the trigger and you'll die? Yes, your majesty. If you pull this trigger, I will die. Hybel nodded. He felt a very dangerous aura. It was the aura of a ruler that made people tremble. Seru Khan succeeded the throne when he was 7 years old. In the past 20 years, he had built the Kuruth kingdom into the strongest kingdom in history. He relied on ruthlessness and killing. Now, he wanted to kill, so the aura he emitted was so dense that it made it difficult for people to breathe. Bang! Seru Khan pulled the trigger, but he was not aiming at Hybel. He shot the general who was yelling about robbing. The crossbow bolt easily pierced through the general's armor, leaving a small hole that was not as big as the arrow. However, the general was in a much worse state than being shot by the crossbow bolt. He widened his eyes and tried to cover the wound on his chest, but he found that he could not even lift his arms. He struggled to stand on the spot, but he staggered and fell backwards. It was not until he was lying on the ground with his back drenched in blood that he realized how powerful the weapon in Seru Khan's hand was. Ugh! He wanted to say something, but he only let out a muffled groan and closed his eyes forever. Around him, the group of generals who didn't dare to move looked at the corpses on the ground and swallowed their saliva before calming themselves down. The decision has been made. Kuruth and the Kingdom of Northland. Peace. Seru Khan put down the crossbow. This is good. I like it very much. He went on, laughing heartily. Chapter 202. Khan. Are you going to let that guy from the Kingdom of Northland leave just like that? After Hybel left the hall, the minister in robes looked at Khan Seru and asked. No one would dare to be so rude in front of the Khan and leave alive. The warriors of the grasslands who were intimidated by the crossbow also looked over at this moment, waiting for the Khan's order to rush out and cut Hybel into pieces. Seru Khan waved his hand and ordered, Men, drag the body out. We'll wait for a few more days. Don't go west to plunder the desert kingdom of Haruz for now. Are we going to give in just like that, Khan? The long-robed official furrowed his brows and asked in an unwilling manner. Forget it? Forget it, it's not that big of a deal. Khan Seru snorted coldly, then looked at his confidant and asked, Who do we have the biggest grudge against? The Kurut kingdom of the grasslands has the biggest grudge against the empire. Back then, our ancestors brought 300,000 armored cavalry to the south, and what happened? The German Empire's heavy cavalry and various magical weapons easily destroyed our dreams of conquering the German Empire. Conceru slowly walked back to his throne and reached out to touch the wolf head carving on it. He turned around and looked at his generals and ministers, then continued to ask, "You all think that we shouldn't give in, but let me ask you, my brave warriors, do we still have the courage to go south and conquer the German Empire?" After asking this question, the generals who were still clamoring not to let the Norland kingdom off all lowered their heads. The scene of the magic crystal cannons spewing flames and blasting the grassland cavalry was still painted on the walls of the hall. How could they forget the despair and fear that was deeply rooted in their bones? "Since we've already given in, why can't we give in again?" Conceru laughed coldly, his voice echoing throughout the hall. "If the kingdom of Northland is willing to trade with us and provide us with the necessities of life, why would we still plunder? If they can't keep their promise, how much will we delay if we continue to plunder?" Conceru sat back on his throne and said, "All we have to do is wait. Wait for a trustworthy king to appear, or wait for a treacherous pig to reveal its weakness." "Your Majesty is wise." The leader in robes bowed and praised. "We just have to wait. If the German Empire isn't stupid, they will definitely start a conflict with the Kingdom of Northland. The conflict between them is irreconcilable, and we will only stand on the side of those who benefit us." "Your Majesty is wise." All the generals and ministers bowed and praised Conceru. Amidst the thunderous cheers, Conceru narrowed his eyes. He knew that he was gambling. He was gambling on whether the Norland kingdom really had the courage and power to change the order of this world. If the Kingdom of Northland really succeeded, he wouldn't mind helping the Kingdom of Northland and using the power of the Kingdom of Northland to destroy the German Empire. If the Kingdom of Northland failed, he wouldn't mind continuing to plunder in the West and returning to his old profession. As for whether he would sit back and watch the Kingdom of Northland rise, he didn't care at all. The rising Kingdom of Northland would definitely clash with the German Empire in the south. Who was stronger and who was weaker would naturally be revealed by then. The worst outcome would be that the Kingdom of Northland defeated the German Empire. Then, the Kuruth Kingdom would have nothing to lose by forming an alliance with the Kingdom of Northland. This was the true strategy of a ruler. His decisions were built on the basis of maximizing benefit. Outside the hall, Habel raised his chin and walked towards the inn with his followers without looking back. He knew that he had completed his mission this time. The Kuruth kingdom could no longer threaten the Kingdom of Northland in the west. Once the dumping began, countless materials would pour into the grasslands and completely destroy the already fragile economy. In the end, this place would become a raw material supply base, providing wool and cotton for the Kingdom of Northland. It would no longer be able to cause any trouble. The developed Kingdom of Northland would only have more and better weapons and equipment. The 100,000 cavalrymen that the Kuruth Kingdom was so proud of would eventually disappear into the dust of history. Just wait. We'll be back soon. Habel thought of his new country and smiled knowingly. At that time, he really didn't think that he would become a foreign affairs minister today. Kill. On the training ground, thousands of soldiers who had just joined the army for a month were practicing their combat skills. Because of the time constraints, their combat skills were trained together with their formation skills. This time, because they were well prepared, every soldier was equipped with a sword, shield, helmet, and armor. They looked very valiant. They all wore helmets unique to the Northland and stood under the scorching sun, sweating profusely as they held round wooden shields and stabbed forward with their swords again and again. Their combat movements were very simple, only blocking and stabbing. They were coherent and easy to grasp. Although many grassroots commanders believed that the possibility of the enemy's close-range attacks was very low after they were equipped with crossbows, the close-range combat training was retained, and it was even strengthened under Ragnar's suggestion. On the other end of the training ground, The soldiers who had been in the army for more than 3 months had to practice crossbow shooting every day. This was the best training conditions that King Gravel could prepare for these recruits. The craftsmen worked overtime every day to produce crossbows, but they were still unable to meet the increasing demand for crossbows. Originally, more than 1,000 people were required to practice crossbow shooting, but now the Kingdom of Northland had expanded to 3,000 crossbowmen. This was a huge pressure for the craftsmen who had just achieved the ability to produce crossbows. According to the plans of King Gravel, Horf Wood and Beffman Watson, the Kingdom of Northland should form 20,000 heavy infantry, 5,000 heavy cavalry, at least 100 magic crystal cannons, and about 8,000 crossbowmen. In addition, in order to deal with the threat of the German Empire, in addition to the crossbow bolts that had been used up during training, they also needed to stockpile crossbow bolts for use in a possible war. According to King Gravel's conservative estimate, he would at least need to stockpile a large number of crossbow bolts before the war with the German Empire. Chapter 203. It was actually very difficult to accumulate so many crossbow bolts in the process of consumption. Moreover, these crossbow bolts were all made of real gold and silver. After they were produced and stored in the warehouse, it was equivalent to squeezing out so much money for nothing. Just looking at it made one's heart ache. If they had used this money to develop other areas, they might have been able to obtain more benefits. Looking at the soldiers who were seriously training on the drill ground, King Gravel was still uncertain about the future war with the German Empire. His army was really too small, and it was troublesome to expand it. It was really a headache. What he lacked now was time. However, there was no time for him to steadily develop and strengthen his army. After this summer, it was very likely that a war would break out next year. Kill! On the drill ground, a mighty voice shouted again. King Gravel looked at these young faces expressionlessly. However, in his heart, he was thinking about the German Empire. The Kingdom of Northland had always been able to stand tall due to its difficult terrain. It had become a big problem for the German Empire. Tyrone William had always wanted to seize a part of the Kingdom of Northland's territory to prove his achievements. I can only use this once. Looking at the huge magic crystal cannons that were being dragged forward by warhorses, Tyrone William's heart was filled with emotions. The soldiers of the German Empire held the reins of their warhorses and walked step by step on the road that was no longer smooth. Behind the horse carriages, there were ancient and heavy magic crystal cannons. Under the sunlight, the black cannons flickered with a dark light. Further away, groups of soldiers carried 3-meter-long spears and walked in orderly steps across the entire hillside. 30,000 soldiers was not a small number. An unprecedented war was about to begin. The grudge between the Kingdom of Northland and the German Empire might be completely resolved in this war. Of course, it could also be worse. Moving his gaze away from those giant magic crystal cannons, Tyrone William clenched the information in his hand. His tone was filled with coldness as he muttered, "He's really a troublesome child. Isn't it good to just stay at home, now that you've fallen to another country?" He crumpled the information in his hand into a ball and threw it into the ground with disdain. "After I defeat the Kingdom of Northland, I'll teach you a lesson." Tyrone Williams was concerned about his youngest son, Joe Williams, and the purpose of his expedition to the north. With that, he pulled the reins of his warhorse, and with a group of guards surrounding him, he mounted the horse and ordered, "Let the troops continue to advance. Just maintain this speed." Also, Zorn adjusted the horse's position as he instructed one of his trusted subordinates, "Send someone to the Norland Kingdom. Have them wash their necks and wait for me." When he said this, Tyrone William had a heroic aura. When he returned to the capital of the German Empire, His prestige in the empire might be higher than that of his son, Alonso. At that time, a small kingdom of Northland would not be a threat at all. As long as there was a bigger battle, that damned King Gravel of the Kingdom of Northland would be captured without a fight. He would then kneel in front of Tyrone William, crying and begging for a way to live. Thinking of this, Tyrone William snorted coldly and urged his horse forward. He wanted to bring the troops to the north before winter came. If he was lucky, he might be able to win the war at the border of the Norland Kingdom before winter came. When spring arrives next year, he would be able to go up north and attack the Kingdom of Northland. This was a good way to go. It would allow him to gain more military merits and prove his ability to his son and the Emperor. Woo! A melodious sound of a horn came from the distant ridge. It was the order for the troops to continue moving forward. All the soldiers continued to move forward until they reached the end of the road. On the other side, a group of cavalrymen wearing black armor raised the flag of the Kingdom of Northland. They escorted a long convoy of carriages and slowly moved forward on the plains. Above their heads, the black eagle flag fluttered in the wind. The armor on their bodies clashed with the steps of their war horses. Every single one of the cavalrymen straightened their backs. They represented a great country that had never been defeated since its birth. On the distant hill, a group of cavalrymen from the grasslands gathered bit by bit. Each of them had 3 horses and looked mighty. Whoa! When they got close to the convoy of the Kingdom of Northland, the leader of the cavalrymen from the grasslands pulled his reins and sat on his horse. He looked at the well-equipped cavalrymen of the Kingdom of Northland and said, "I hope the things you bring are valuable." On the other side, the leader of the cavalrymen from the Kingdom of Northland grinned. He pulled his reins and turned his horse around. He came to the side of a carriage and pulled out his sword. He then stabbed the sack behind the carriage. Whoosh! White powder began to flow out from the hole in the sack and scattered on the grassland like a silver waterfall. It looked like flowing spring water. It was pleasing to look at. When the leader of the grasslands saw the white powder falling down, his eyes widened even more. He did not even have time to give orders. He squeezed his horse's belly and rushed to the carriage. Immediately after, he dismounted from his horse. Due to his excitement, he staggered to the side of the carriage. Using his hand, he caught the falling silver powder and brought it to his mouth for a taste. Ah, it's salt. Because of his heartache, he even wanted to use his hand to block the hole made by the sword. However, he found that the entire carriage was filled with identical sacks. In shock, he turned around and looked at the leader of the cavalrymen from the Kingdom of Northland. "These are all salt?" The leader of the cavalrymen from the Kingdom of Northland smiled even more brightly. He pointed at the long convoy behind and said with certainty, 20 carriages! They are all filled with table salt. There are also 20 carriages filled with ironware and porcelain. Salt. As if he thought of something, the leader of the grasslands turned around and raised his right hand to the cavalryman he brought with him. He shouted loudly. The fierce-looking cavalrymen from the grasslands immediately shouted like a tsunami. Each wave was louder than the last. Many people dismounted from their horses and gathered around the carriage. With curious eyes, they looked at the salt bags that were rarely seen in the past. "Oh my God! It's ironware! It's ironware!" On the other side, a few people from the grasslands who lifted the curtains of the carriages shouted in horror. They saw that the shining iron pots were stacked together to save space. They were stacked together to form a huge iron pillar. Chapter 204. Some of the carriages were stacked neatly with glass products. The crystal-clear bottles and cups made the people of the grassland drop their jaws. They caressed the warm glass products and did not want to let go. After a while, the grassland general finally remembered something. He held the reins and walked to the captain of the Kingdom of Northland. He placed his right hand on his chest and asked, "We know that these are expensive goods. How much does the Kingdom of Northland want us to pay this time?" "The glass products are cheap, 30 copper coins for a bottle. The iron pots are more expensive. After all, we are also short of iron. The price is 15 silver coins." The captain of the Kingdom of Northland did not speak. A merchant beside him talked about the price of these goods. In fact, he made a lot of money because the price of these goods in the Kingdom of Northland was about half of the price he quoted now. As for the salt, the price is also very reasonable. 100 gold coins for a carriage. I will leave the carriage to you. The merchant was overjoyed as he calculated the abacus. His trip this time was really fruitful, with a gross income of more than 1,000 gold coins. Just the trade volume of this caravan alone was already so huge. Originally, when the grassland general heard the price of 100 gold coins, he was prepared to be cheated by the profiteer. But when he heard that the unit was carriage, his expression became interesting. He looked up at the captain of the Kingdom of Northland and raised his hand to pass the reins of his horse to the captain. "You are the most respectable merchants I have ever seen. This horse is the most handsome in the grassland. I will give it to you. It will be a testimony of our friendship. Welcome to the grassland. Tonight we will not rest until we are drunk. Kill the sheep. Welcome the distinguished guests." After that, he shouted to his people. The grassland people who were on horseback or had already dismounted also cheered. "Kill the sheep! Kill the sheep! I heard that trading with the grassland people is very dangerous." The merchant looked at the captain of the knights beside him with a puzzled expression. In the past, a bag of salt cost 10 gold coins. The captain of the knights tied the reins of the other warhorse to his saddle and replied without raising his head. The merchant was stunned for a moment, and then he realized in despair how many gold coins he had just lost. However, at this moment, at the border between the German Empire and the Kingdom of Northland, there were some villages and towns in the Kingdom of Northland near the Wilson Mountains. Boom! Boom! At the border between the Kingdom of Northland and the German Empire, a round of magic crystal cannons landed in the middle of a dense crowd. The guards of the village were cut up by the rampaging cannonballs, plowing out trails of blood. The magic crystal cannons developed by the magicians had rewritten the history of war. The side that had the magic crystal cannons seemed to have the upper hand on the battlefield. The soldiers of the German Empire were advancing steadily. They could already see the smile of the goddess of victory. These magic crystal cannons were transferred from Kellendil to the Blackstone Castle through Alonso. The magic crystal cannons were a kind of gold-devouring beast that consumed a lot of magic crystals. Without enough strength, even if they were given to him for free, he would not be able to afford to use them. The Northland soldiers who were originally in a tight formation were now staggering. The terrifying magic cannons fell from the sky and splashed a bloody rain into the crowd. The entire line of defense was collapsing. The officers of the Kingdom of Northland were no longer able to stop the collapse of their soldiers. At this moment they did not want to stop this collapse, because they were also in the midst of the collapsing crowd. No one dared to face such a terrifying weapon. Everyone thought that the German Empire was going all out this time to take revenge. Therefore, the Northland soldiers were not only defeated by the power of the weapon, but also by the aura of the enemy. Did our God abandon us? An officer crawled up from the ground with blood all over his face. He cried as he tried to find his arm. His armored arm was cut off by a hot current like butter being cut by a hot knife. One of the soldiers struggled to stand up, only to find that his legs were gone. He tried his best to shout, but found that he could only spit out blood. Soon, he became motionless, lying down with the corpses around him, not making any sound. Not far away, the army of the German Empire was marching in an orderly manner. Along with the sound of drums, they approached the hellish battlefield step by step. There was no longer any organized resistance in front of them. There were only a few crazy enemy soldiers. Countless spears were leveled and then swept away everything in front of them. Some soldiers who forgot to run were quickly stabbed to the ground. The German soldiers continued to advance step by step, completely ignoring the corpses under their feet. Long live the German! On the high slope, the soldiers who hadn't had time to participate in this crushing attack let out mountainous cheers. Their flags fluttered in the sky and their voices echoed across the plains. Riding on a tall horse, Tyrone William pointed at the battle formation in the distance with his armored glove. He proudly said to his followers, "Look! There is no one on the border of the Northland who can stop the army of the German Empire. No, this is our northern province. We are only here to kill these pitiful traitors." Yes, yes. An officer had a flattering smile on his face. He praised Tyrone William and said, "Sir, you are the best commander." Under your leadership, the German Empire will definitely reach the peak. Ha 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 ha! Tyrone William laughed out loud. However, his laughter did not spread far before it was drowned out by the sound of the war drums. He proudly pulled on the reins of his warhorse and said, "These small towns will definitely report this matter to Gravel. Unfortunately, they will never expect that we have already set up cannons in front of their homes. Ha ha ha! Sir, you are so wise. Sir, you are so wise. Sir, you are really the star of the German." The group of flattering officers hurriedly nodded their heads and bowed, flattering Tyrone William. After hearing these praises, the smile on Tyrone William's face became even brighter and he became even more proud. He was in a good mood and gave an even more radical order: "Order the troops! We do not need prisoners." Chapter 205. In the distance in front of him, there were square formations full of iron armor that were slowly moving towards the end of the horizon. The first battle between the German Empire and the Kingdom of Northland ended with the German Empire's complete victory. In this battle, Tyrone William led 30,000 troops of the German Empire and easily swept away the border guards of the Kingdom of Northland. At least 3,000 Northland soldiers and civilians were slaughtered. However, the German Empire paid a very small price for this victory. They did not even manage to gather 200 wounded soldiers. The magic crystal cannons that had just been shown on the battlefield had already demonstrated the terrifying power of this terrifying war machine. It was also because of the good performance of the magic crystal cannons in this battle that Tyrone William liked this weapon even more. "Tell the rear to hurry up. This weapon should be equipped with every castle and every army." Tyrone William urged his horse forward and ordered one of his confidants, "After this victory, I think the Northland will soon surrender. After we go back, I want at least 100 new cannons." He continued to speak as he moved forward, "The next battle won't be so easy. They also have cannons like this. So, the situation of the war won't be so one-sided." Not only that, there was also the problem of supply. It was extremely difficult to establish a supply line because of the Wilson Mountains. This was also the reason why the Empire had been reluctant to make a move for so many years. The last expedition that was urged by Kaiser the Great had been interrupted because of the supply line, and many soldiers had died tragically in foreign lands. At this time, in the Eagle Castle in the capital of the Kingdom of Northland, Gorgon. As long as Tyrone William leads his main force north, our border may be penetrated. This is a loss for us because the war will destroy our carefully paved roads and our crop. He pointed at a very large and detailed military map and pointed at the location of the border with the Empire. "The best way is to have most of our men head south in advance and gather at the border. Be prepared for battle at any time," Horf said from the side. If Tyrone William's plan to attack the Kingdom of Northland was only a rough plan, Then King Gravel's plan to fight against the German Empire was already a very precise battle plan. But who would have thought that the Tailuan Empire's army had already marched north, catching the kingdom of Northland off guard? On the other hand, in Larma, the capital of the Kurut kingdom, a middle-aged merchant blew a breath of hot air onto his hands. He wrapped his hands tightly around the fur from the grasslands, looked up at the signboard above his head, and strode into the rice shop. The shop assistant inside hurriedly came over to greet them. At this time, those who came to buy rice must be very, very rich merchants. After all, the price of rice in the Kurut kingdom was not cheap. As long as they waited until next year's harvest season, when the new grain was harvested, the price of rice would immediately fall. If they did not need it urgently, it was obviously more profitable to consider purchasing grain next year. However, since summer, the price of rice, which should have fallen, had become incomprehensible due to the frantic purchase of the Kingdom of Northland. Now, these grains were really expensive, and there were even countless merchants from the Kingdom of Northland coming to buy them. It was really hard to tell what they were thinking. How much grain do you have left to sell in your shop? I want all of it. As soon as the merchant entered, he did not beat around the bush and directly stated his purpose. When the shop assistant heard this, the smile on his face stiffened. There were more and more merchants from the Kingdom of Northland who came to cause trouble recently. They said that they wanted to buy all the grain as soon as they arrived, and it was as if they did not want to leave a way out for others. However, they were all guests, and the shop assistant did not want to offend these big merchants. After all, at this time next year, the price of grain might fall, and he would still have to rely on these merchants to buy grain to eat. So he squeezed out a somewhat forced smile and explained, "Sir, you may not be aware, but because of the sharp decline in grain reserves, His Majesty has issued a purchase restriction order. You can only purchase 50 barrels of grain at a time." The unit of calculation of grain was actually a way of measuring grain by volume, and it was neither accurate nor scientific. However, because each country had its own measurement system, such things could only be tolerated. Now, the Kingdom of Northland had begun to popularize new units of measurement. There were various units of length and weight, which made it much more convenient for people to use. Coupled with the widespread use of new numbers, all the territories under the rule of King Gravel had made great progress in their calculations. "Can't you make an exception?" The merchant pressed a gold coin on the coffee table beside him, and the golden light was so dazzling that it was difficult to open one's eyes. 100 barrels. "This is the best deal we can do." The shop assistant looked around before putting the gold coin into his pocket and said, "The price will be the same as this morning. This is the best deal." Everyone knew that there was no need to worry about grain sales now, and everyone had their eyes on this area. The locals were driving up prices, and the foreigners were frantically buying. The grain stock in the rice shops was rapidly decreasing, and the Kuruth kingdom had even begun to fall into a state of partial shortage. "All right." The merchant was easy to talk to, and nodded in agreement. He stood up and said, "Then I'll have to trouble you to pack up all the grain. I'll be shipping it away soon." There was no other way. Although it pained him, he could only take out his money pouch from his pocket and place a stack of gold coins on the table for the other party to examine carefully. 100 barrels of grain would not even be worth a single gold coin in the past, but now it was so expensive. Not only that, the Kingdom of Northland was racking their brains to buy large amounts of grain, but they were also frantically buying meat products from the grasslands. Not only were they buying fresh, live cattle and sheep, but they were also buying dried meat. After all, the population of the Kingdom of Northland was growing, and King Gravel had ordered a large amount of grain to be stored before winter. In every rice shop in every corner of the Kuruth kingdom, there were merchants from the Kingdom of Northland frantically buying grain. They did not care about the price. As long as the other party dared to sell, they would dare to pay for the grain. On the bustling streets of Galgalon, everyone had a happy smile on their face. In the past, such smiles were rare, but now almost everyone in the kingdom of Northland was full of hope for the future, so smiles were the most common expression. Chapter 206. No one believed that the kingdom of Northland would collapse. Many merchants had already placed their bets on another possibility. In their opinion, the kingdom of Northland was going to replace the once invincible German Empire. However, when the news spread from the border to the Eagle Fortress in Gorgron, the Northland knight who was covered in wounds was told by King Gravel that he could rest. However, the dagger that was stabbed into his body made him unable to believe that the king would treat him this way. The next day, an emergency military meeting was held in the Eagle stronghold. Wilson's lord, Beffman, forced a smile and thanked the king. "This is my problem. I didn't have to trouble the king to help me. It's time for us to draw our swords, Beffman. The German Empire is one step ahead of us. There's no turning back. We can only keep moving forward." King Gravel had a smile on his face as he comforted Beffman. "If you really want to save your civilians, you should pull yourself together, right?" At this time, the news of the kingdom of Northland's border collapsing was still being kept secret. Ordinary citizens had no idea what had happened at the border. However, paper couldn't wrap fire, and the news still spread like wildfire among the people. King Gravel thought for a moment and said, "Things are going in the most dangerous direction. Soon, we will become the target of the Empire's army. Gather the troops. Head to the border. We have to stop the war outside the city." Ugh! A Kingdom of Northland soldier was awakened by the pain. He subconsciously pushed away the corpse on top of him. His face was covered in blood and there was a crossbow arrow in his body. He tried his best to recall what had just happened. Then, he seemed to recall something terrifying and a look of fear appeared on his face. He tried to sit up but found that there were corpses all around him. This place was like hell. Blood flowed like rivers and corpses piled up like mountains. The air was filled with sulfur and the smell of rotting flesh. It made one want to vomit after taking a breath. Woo! Seeing the familiar faces lying on the ground in front of him and the burnt corpses of his comrades, the surviving German soldier cried in despair. Just as he was about to cry and stand up, a black shadow quickly descended from above his head, followed by the whistling sound of the wind. The soldier opened his eyes wide and raised his head to see a huge magic crystal bomb swooping down. Crack! Before the soldier could scream, the magic crystal bursting bullet tore him into two pieces. His two legs were sent flying far away while his upper body had been blasted into minced meat. The poor defenders of a Northland town didn't even have time to use their newly equipped crossbows before they were slaughtered by the Empire's Blackstone Fort Expeditionary Force. What was even more frightening was that they didn't even see the enemy's leader until they died. The ones who defeated these Northland defenders were only the vanguard of the Blackstone Fort Expeditionary Army and some magic crystal cannons. General Tyrone. The enemy's army has been destroyed. Several officers in charge of the vanguard command walked up to the leading general and threw a blood-stained Northland flag on the ground. Very good. General Tyrone glanced at the blood-stained flag on the ground and nodded with satisfaction. Those who defy the Empire must pay the price. After saying that, he stepped on the blood-stained flag with his iron boots and said impatiently, "The resistance here is simply courting death. I really don't want to waste a day here. I want to see when that Gravel will come. I think they already know the news and the situation here. I'm afraid they won't dare to come anymore," an officer who looked like his deputy said with a cold smile. Tyrone looked at his deputy and said, "The only thing left now is to go to Gorgon and tell them who is the ruler of this place." However, in Gorgon, war horses were pulling all kinds of carriages in the same direction. The carriages were filled with fully armed Northland recruits. Their eyes were resolute and they believed that they would win. Behind the carriages they were sitting in, there were all kinds of magic crystal cannons that trembled violently with the rolling of the wooden wheels. Under the wheels, the dust that was kicked up was scattered in the distance and mixed with the dust that was kicked up by the other wheels, covering the sky and the sun. The Kingdom of Northland! Long live the Kingdom of Northland! With the orderly pace of the army, the commanders who held their swords shouted their slogans louder and louder. As their slogans ended, all the soldiers followed suit and shouted heroically, "The Kingdom of Northland! Long live the Kingdom of Northland!" Lord Horf, who was riding on a war horse, raised his chin and looked expressionlessly at his army leaving the camp. The same scene was happening in various cities of the Kingdom of Northland. Countless soldiers left their camps and shouted, "Long live the Kingdom of Northland!" Further north in these territories, the Northland flag fluttered in the wind. Countless soldiers left their camps and rushed to the gathering place. Within half a morning after the decision was made to send troops to the border, the Kingdom of Northland's troops stationed in various places moved out of their barracks. From this small detail, one could see how high the combat readiness of the Kingdom of Northland's troops was. The war behemoth that had been built with countless gold coins began to move at this moment. What was even more awe-inspiring was that the roar of this behemoth was enough to show everyone its might. This time, the warriors of the grasslands can finally launch an attack on the German Empire together. The envoy of the Kuruth Kingdom, who was in charge of the trade between the two countries, said with a smile. The Kingdom of Northland was not acting alone this time. After showing its strength to the Kuruth Kingdom of the grasslands, it had also tied the Kuruth Kingdom to its war chariot. The two countries had signed a secret treaty long ago and formed an alliance. The Kuruth Kingdom of the grasslands had always dreamed of revenge, so they were very supportive of the Kingdom of Northland's attack plan. They promised to provide troops when the Kingdom of Northland went south to help the Kingdom of Northland win the war against the German Empire. Not only that, according to the previous agreement with the Mercenary Association, the Kingdom of Northland had also formed an alliance with the Partheni Island, which had always claimed to be free and neutral. Therefore, in this expedition, the Partheni Islands Mercenary Association would also assist in attacking the German Empire. Chapter 207. Therefore, on the same day that the main forces of the Kingdom of Northland began to move south, the forces of the Kurut Kingdom also began to move south. 30,000 Northland soldiers, 50,000 grassland cavalrymen, and members of the Mercenary Association were on the ships of Partheni Island. From the moment the war broke out, it was destined to not be a local conflict. In King Gravel's plan, this war could at least be seen as a rehearsal for the destruction of the German Empire. We can't go out of the city to fight. The enemy has advanced so far in one day and one night, they must have something up their sleeves. If we take the risk to attack them now, if we win, they may have more reinforcements. If we lose, we will lose Rayleigh. Standing on top of the city wall, looking at the army holding the flag of the Empire in the distant plains, the officer of the garrison of Rayleigh Town, Raymond, held his sword and comforted his subordinates. Rayleigh Town was a new town under Gorgon. With the victory of the last expedition and the wealth brought back, this small town that was originally unknown was greatly developed. Now, it had become the largest town around the border, with a newly built fortress. His voice seemed to have magical powers. After hearing his analysis, the soldiers who were ready to fight to the death with the enemy suppressed their thoughts of revenge and killing the enemy. Let our men rest. The enemy might not attack immediately, but we have to prepare our defenses. We can't afford to make any mistakes on the walls. Raymond was an experienced veteran who had been on the battlefield for a long time. He looked worriedly at the enemies in the distance who were not moving. He had to add to his subordinates, if the enemy enters the range of attack, use the catapults behind the walls to repel them. Raymond was very good at looking at the big picture. He knew that the expeditionary forces of Blackstone Fort could not last long. They wanted to take Rayleigh Town in one go, which was the best proof that they wanted to enter the town to resupply and avoid the upcoming battle. Therefore, as a frontline commander, what he needed to do was not to eliminate the enemy and gain credit. What he needed to do was to prevent the enemy from accomplishing their goal. As long as the enemy could not take down the city, the reinforcements of the Kingdom of Northland would definitely increase. He had already sent someone to inform King Gravel. When the time came, the enemy would only have one choice: retreat. Therefore, the current situation was very troublesome and complicated, but in Raymond's eyes, it was actually so simple that it made him feel a little bored. Boom! Just when Raymond felt a little bored, the expeditionary forces of Blackstone Fort in the distance showed their trump card. A magic explosive bullet pierced through the air with a sharp whistling sound and landed in Rayleigh Town. The magic bomb crashed into a house, smashed the roof tiles of the house, and then exploded in the house, knocking down 2 walls. Immediately after, the surrounding houses began to tremble and collapse, emitting a low and oppressive rumble. "What is that?" Redmond's eyes widened as he looked at the collapsed buildings behind him. Redmond's steady voice trembled as he asked his adjutant in disbelief. The adjutant was also shocked, speechless. He didn't have the mood to answer Redmond's question. He looked at the collapsing building, and the unforgettable explosion was still ringing in his ears. Boom! Before the two of them could recover from their shock, the second magic explosive bullet crashed into the walls of Rayleigh Town. The explosion caused the walls to crack, but the thick walls still stubbornly refused to fall. However, the soldiers on the city wall had already turned pale from the shock of the 2 consecutive explosions. They were not afraid of the enemies rushing to their feet, because they had too many ways to fight against the enemies who were besieging the city. But now, everything in front of them was beyond their understanding. Now they didn't know what was happening, and the fear brought by ignorance was the real fear that went deep into their bones. Boom! Just like the bell of doomsday, the sound of the explosion was endless. The third explosion also occurred in the city. Another innocent building collapsed, and black smoke billowed out of it. By this time, Redmond had already recovered from his shock. He knew that the strategy he thought was foolproof seemed to have completely failed. The impenetrable walls seemed to be vulnerable in the eyes of the enemy. Could it be that these are the legendary magic crystal cannons? In the billowing smoke, Raymond stared at the Empire's flag and sighed. "Hold the line. Retreat is not allowed. We are the brave warriors of the Northland. Death to us is like going home. Our ancestors are summoning us from the martyr's palace." He suddenly shouted to all the soldiers in front of him. His voice, to boost their morale, drifted far away in the gaps between the explosions. Boom! However, a few seconds later, an even more ferocious cannon fire completely suppressed the shouts from the top of Rayleigh Town. The Blackstone Fort Expeditionary Army below the town had gathered almost all of their magic crystal cannons. The power of a volley of cannon fire was not something that could be resisted by mere mortals. Rumble! After another round of fire aimed at the city wall, the thick city wall of Rayleigh finally collapsed in the explosion. The battlements tumbled down the walls, and the corpses of the soldiers on the walls were also buried in the smoke and debris. Seeing that there was a gap in his walls, Raymond knew that this defensive battle was destined to be difficult. He knew that sometimes soldiers had to face the worst outcome calmly. A towering catapult was torn apart by the shockwave of the explosion. Countless wooden supports collapsed and shattered. The soldiers under the catapult were already in a mess. A huge wooden lever smashed into another catapult next to it, making a creaking sound. After 3 volleys of cannon fire, the scene in Rayleigh Town was like the end of the world. "Sir, the enemy did not surround us. Let's retreat to the north." Raymond's adjutant's face was covered in smoke and dust. He pulled Raymond's arm and urged loudly. It couldn't be helped. After a few rounds of bombardment, everyone's voices on the battlefield would become incomparably loud. Because they were already used to that kind of deafening environment, their ears had long become less sensitive. Chapter 208. This adjutant's armor was no longer shiny, and one could even see some splashes of blood on it. The enemy was still a few miles away, but the defenders on the city walls had already suffered heavy losses. The explosion just now had caused them to lose hundreds of men, and hundreds of others suffered light injuries. If not for the protection of the armor, the soldiers would have suffered even greater losses. The most important thing was not the loss of these soldiers, but the defense of Rayleigh town, which was almost completely destroyed. Clang! Raymond drew his sword from his waist, pushed away the adjutant who was hugging his arm, and ordered loudly, "Reserves! Follow me to the collapsed city walls. Line up. Prepare for battle. The enemy should be here soon. We don't have much time left." The soldiers behind him also unsheathed their swords. Raymond had a lot of prestige in Rayleigh town, so at this crucial moment, there were many people who were willing to stand up and support this admirable officer. "If the Empire dares to charge, I will show them what I've got. I'll let them know what a cruel war is." Raymond stubbornly raised his sword and stood on the city wall. Behind him, the broken flag of the Kingdom of Northland was still stubbornly struggling in the black smoke. But soon, the black mass of the Empire's soldiers rushed over like a tide. "Brothers, let these bastards of the Empire see how we, the Northland people, fight." Raymond roared angrily and shot an arrow at the enemy from the city walls. The arrow flew out and hit the head of one of the Empire's soldiers, and the soldier of the Blackstone Fort Expeditionary Force fell to the ground. For a moment, on the broken city walls, the archers and crossbowmen of the Northland crazily shot at the Empire's soldiers. As long as they were still breathing, they used all their remaining strength to kill the enemy. Raymond saw that the enemy was very close, so he went down the city walls and prepared to lead the rest of the soldiers to the broken city walls. He was ready to go all out against the black mass of Empire's soldiers. The enemy's heavy cavalry of the Blackstone Fort wore armor with a coat of arms, and Lord Tyrann's coat of arms was a flag with a white upper half and a green lower half. The two halves of the flag each had a picture of a cat of the opposite color. These Blackstone Fort's heavy cavalry were fully armed and had excellent equipment. The reason why Lord Tai Luen didn't use them as the vanguard was because he was confident in this battle. He didn't want to lose any heavy cavalry. Tai Luen believed that he could crush these small border cities easily. Moreover, he didn't know how long it would take for the reinforcements from the Empire's royal family to arrive. Therefore, he was trying his best to minimize the losses of his elite corps forces because he knew that the real battle was coming. Even though Tyrone had brought a lot of magic bombs with him this time, he still wanted to use them sparingly. After all, they would need these things to influence the outcome of the war in the future. He also knew that Gravel also had these things in his hands, so he needed to suppress him with numbers. Therefore, to deal with a small place like Rayleigh, they only needed to break through the enemy's defensive structures and leave the rest to the Empire's infantry in Blackstone Fort. "Shield wall! Shield wall!" Redmond roared at the remaining Norseland defenders. Therefore, the rest of the well-trained soldiers immediately formed a shield wall formation with strong defensive power. This formation was made up of every Northland soldier's shield next to each other, forming a human wall. Following the orderly battle cries of the Northland soldiers, the enemy had already approached the gap in the city wall. The Empire's infantry were also unusually brave. They were the soldiers of Blackstone Fort, so they were on a completely different level compared to the city guards. A fierce battle had already begun. The Empire's Blackstone Fort soldiers wielding spears, and the Northland soldiers wielding wooden shields and one-handed longswords were actually neck and neck. After all, the Northland defenders' weapons were shorter, so they didn't have an advantage. The Empire's weapons were longer spears, but they were helpless against the Northland soldiers' shields and iron barrel-like defense. On the other hand, the Northland archers on the city wall shot arrows with all their might, killing many of the Empire's soldiers. However, at the same time, they were also killed by the crossbow-wielding Empire's soldiers. For a moment, the battlefield was a bit of a stalemate. Seeing this, the Empire's heavy cavalry charged towards the Northland defenders through a path that the Empire's infantry had opened up. In an instant, the Empire's heavy cavalry charged towards the Northland defenders' shield wall and crushed it. In just a moment, the Northland's shield wall was broken apart by the Empire's heavy cavalry. In a moment, with the addition of the Empire's spearmen, the scattered Northland soldiers could only fight on their own. Raymond held a shield in one hand and a sword in the other, slashing at the Empire's soldiers who rushed in. He used his shield to block an Empire soldier's spear, then nimbly closed in and slashed the soldier's neck with his sharp sword. The Empire soldier threw away the spear in his hand and tried to stop the blood from flowing out of his neck with both hands, but it was futile. He fell to the ground and didn't move anymore. The remaining Northland soldiers fought with their lives on the line. Their faces were covered in blood, some of it from the enemy, some of it from themselves. The sharp swords were a little blunt, and when the swords were blunt, they used their shields to smash the enemy's helmet. Taking advantage of the moment when the enemy was unconscious, the cold swords pierced the enemy's weak points. Of course, there were also Northland soldiers who were killed by the combined forces of the Empire's soldiers. Some were shot in the back by the enemy's crossbow, and some were pierced by the enemy's spearmen. They were all brave warriors, waiting for the call of God Oracle. Tonight, their spirits would be able to drink and drink with the heroes in the Havagard shrine to celebrate. They had died bravely in battle and would return to the embrace of God. After Raymond killed about 10 more Empire soldiers, he was shot in the leg by a German Empire crossbowman in the distance. He was in so much pain that he knelt down. At this time, a captain of the heavy cavalry saw him and took out a rope and tied it around Raymond's neck. Raymond's vision was blurred by the blood, and he immediately urged his horse to speed up. Just like that, Raymond was dragged far away, his blood forming a long trail on the ground. The others were also surrounded. They had no hope and they didn't fear death. Raymond didn't die, but he was being dragged away by the enemy's knights. The pain filled him with hatred, and he hated these Empire bastards. Chapter 209. At the same time, on the plains in the distance, a large army was marching towards Rayleigh. Dong, 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 dong. The sound of the war drums seemed to be beating on the hearts of the people, making it difficult to breathe. The flag of King Gravel fluttered in the sky, and rows of soldiers walked down the hill, marching into the distance. King Gravel sat on his warhorse, looking at the black mass of Northland soldiers walking past him, his heart filled with pride. The warhorse under him was shaking its head and snorting, and the carved armor on his body was heavy and hard, which made him feel very comfortable, very comfortable. The army in front of him was vast and endless, and King Gravel had brought almost all the troops that the Kingdom of Northland could mobilize, which added up to more than 30,000 people. Accompanied by the majestic drums and the sound of horns, huge phalanxes were slowly moving forward. In between these phalanxes that were moving forward slowly, there was a long and thin passage like a wheat field, and the cavalry in charge of communication was riding back and forth. Even in the eyes of outsiders, the army of Northland in front of him was definitely an elite division with strict discipline. King Gravel had such an army, and with reinforcements from the Guild of Mercenaries on Partheni Island and the Kuruth Kingdom on the plains, he was confident that he would not be defeated. Whoa! Lord Horf was wearing the same armor, and he held his reins in front of King Gravel and said loudly, "Your Majesty! Rayleigh is just ahead. Do you want the troops to assemble first?" Ahem. King Gravel cleared his throat, and he did not feel that his army needed to wait. He waved his hand and ordered his men, "Order the troops in front to form a phalanx and wait for orders. The troops behind continue to move forward. Just maintain the formation." What a joke! Tens of thousands of Northland troops plus the advanced technology from the Empire. Even if the opponent's commander had the guts of iron, he would not dare to go against his army. Whoosh! A gust of wind blew, and the grass rippled in the wind. The soldiers in gray steel armor walked up the distant hillside step by step. "Your Majesty, I heard that they are already reorganizing their formation. Let's go." Horf pulled his reins, turned his horse around, and began rushing forward. The cavalry on both sides of King Gravel also began to move forward. The ground was trampled by countless horse hooves, producing a dull thud. The cavalrymen who held the flag high held it tightly in their hand. The Northland flag was pulled apart by the wind and fluttered in the wind. It was a pleasing sight. King Gravel rode on the horse's back. He clamped the horse's belly with his legs and pulled the reins to let the horse move forward. A huge drum chariot pulled by several war horses was right behind King Gravel. The drummers on it were still beating the war drums that were as tall as humans in front of them tirelessly. The dull drumbeats that excited King Gravel were the result of their hammering. King Gravel, who was slowly moving forward on his horse, observed his army with the eyes of a leader. As they advanced, the infantrymen, archers, and cavalry on both sides maintained a very orderly formation. The whole army moved without any noise. Even the footsteps of these soldiers were accompanied by the beat of the drums. There was not the slightest bit of disorder. No matter how one looked at it, the army in front of him was an impeccable and strong opponent. The most elite troops of the Kingdom of Northland, including the most powerful combat power of the two lords, coupled with the newly expanded army, this lineup could definitely completely wipe out the enemies who came to harass Blackstone Fort. It would be unreasonable if they still could not win. That was what King Gravel thought in his heart. He knew that each of these soldiers were carefully selected veterans, and their combat power had always been very strong. The rest of the troops were also newly trained elites, and each of them was a qualified soldier who had undergone strict training. Just as King Gravel was feeling proud of his invincible army, a huge shadow blocked the sun above his head. It was as if a dark cloud had covered the sky above his head. Roar! A deafening roar even covered the sound of the giant drums. A huge airship flew over King Gravel's head, and with an indomitable momentum, it climbed higher into the sky in the distance. Then, before King Gravel could catch his breath, a second airship swept past the marching formation of the Northland Army, and many soldiers looked up in fear. This airship was larger than the one that flew past, and looked even more terrifying. Then, the third and fourth airships glided across the ground, and all the soldiers of the Kingdom of Northland were excited to see them. Although these airships were not very fast, and did not fly particularly high, these airships were no longer a privilege of the Empire, and they gave the soldiers of the Northland a firm morale and unparalleled courage. "Your Majesty, our vanguard has collided with the Empire's army that is currently entrenched in Rayleigh town. These despicable bastards." At this moment, an officer walked over to King Gravel and reported the latest situation. "What's wrong?" King Gravel looked at the officer and choked up. They threw all the defenders of Rayleigh town onto the city walls, and their bodies were badly mutilated. Our soldiers in front saw it with their own eyes. The officer said with tears in his eyes, "Let the vanguard attack. We must avenge our fallen brothers." King Gravel clenched his fist and ordered, "Your Majesty, should we use the magic crystal cannons to attack the walls of Rayleigh town first?" The officer said. King Gravel had the same thought, and he immediately ordered, "Advance! Let the magic crystal cannons aim at Rayleigh town first." Upon hearing his order, the flag-bearers standing beside him began to wave the large flags in their hands, and gave the order to attack to each formation. At the forefront, the formation of the Kingdom of Northland had already formed an attack formation, and the formation in the middle began to move forward again. After a few steps, the formations on both sides of the formation in the middle began to move forward. Soon, the newly formed magic crystal cannons were aimed at the enemy's walls not far away. Under the heavy beating of the drums, the formation of infantry also began to move forward slowly, and the gray armor rippled. The sound of metal clashing against metal was refreshing. Soon, this formation would be able to wipe out the enemy, take back the city, and destroy the expeditionary force of Blackstone Fort. "Now I'm here. Commander of Blackstone Fort, let's see how you defeat my invincible army." King Gravel pulled the reins and urged his horse forward, bringing his guards to a hillside where they could overlook the entire battlefield. Chapter 210. On the hillside, King Gravel had a bird's-eye view of Rayleigh town. He discovered that the German Empire's Blackstone Fort Expeditionary Force had occupied Rayleigh town with tens of thousands of soldiers. Rayleigh town was a small town with a small population. The Blackstone Fort Expeditionary Force had turned the town into a military fortress. Gravel also discovered that most of the defensive structures at the south gate of Rayleigh town had been damaged. It seemed that the Empire had broken in from there. Not only that, but Gravel also saw the thing that he didn't want to see the most, which was the magic crystal cannons. The number of magic crystal cannons was greater than the number of magic crystal cannons they had. Although he was already making preparations, the enemy's sudden attack had greatly affected his original plan of expanding his army. His army had no choice but to go to the front lines. This was probably the biggest war that the Norland Kingdom had ever fought since it was founded. Both the enemy and their allies had almost brought out their families. This time, King Gravel had great confidence in the modified airships that were put into use for the first time. Of these 4 airships, one of them was seized from the Empire at Primordium Port. The remaining 3 were replicated by almost all the mechanics and craftsmen of the Kingdom of Northland. This included Kelvin of the Demon Hunter's Blade in Bauhinia Manor in Grizzly Town. After countless days and nights of research, these craftsmen finally replicated a larger and more powerful experimental airship. Although it eventually crashed in countless tests, the Kingdom of Northland still mastered the ability to replicate and modify airship. Now, the other 3 airships were the new models. The Kingdom of Northland built airships that were larger than the Empire's. Even the magic crystal cannons that were replicated were larger than the Empire's. Not only that, the craftsmen of the Empire had also added some secret weapons to these airships to make them even more powerful. Gravel knew that the time for the decisive battle had come. They were going to fight it out with the Empire. Blackstone Fort, this barrier that had been unsurpassable for many years, now actually took the initiative to come to their doorstep. It was simply courting death. While Gravel was still thinking about how to wipe out the Empire's expeditionary force in the town of Rayleigh. "This guy is the enemy's commander?" Tyrone looked at Raymond, who was covered in blood. Raymond was tied up. Previously, he had been dragged away by the Empire's heavy cavalry captain. Now, he was tied up and brought to Tyrone. Raymond was covered in blood, and his consciousness was fading. Many of the corpses of the Northland soldiers who died in battle were hung on the walls of Rayleigh town. Most of the men in the town were slaughtered, and the rest who surrendered were locked up in a huge farmhouse. The Northland women were captured by the Empire's soldiers. The elderly and children were all killed and thrown outside the city to feed the crows. Most of the captured women were relatively young. They were arranged in an open area. The Imperial soldiers who were working hard on the expedition lined up in the open area and started some intense exercise. After working hard for so long, they could finally have some fun. Every Imperial soldier was waiting for their turn. Everywhere, the screams of the Northland women and the wretched laughter of the Imperial soldiers could be heard. When war came, the ones who suffered the most would always be the ordinary civilians and the weak. However, it was a feast for the strong. Almost all of the Northland soldiers died bravely in battle. They drank and chatted with their ancestors in the Martyr's Palace. Raymond was the only one left who couldn't die. Raymond, who was tortured until he was no longer human, was brought to see Tyrone. Yes, we have confirmed this guy. The Northland soldiers who surrendered told us that he is indeed the commander of this town. An officer reported to Lord Tyrone. Tyrone looked at the corpses of the Imperial soldiers that were being carried to be buried at the entrance of the town. He actually admired Raymond a little. In a situation where he was alone and the enemy outnumbered him by several times, he was able to calmly command his troops. Furthermore, none of his soldiers were willing to retreat, and all of them died in battle. If it wasn't for the fact that his cavalry captain managed to capture him alive, Redmond would probably have died a heroic death. Are you willing to surrender? I can give you a chance to live. Tyrone asked the unconscious Raymond in the German language. Damn it, Imperial bastards, I can't wait to kill all of you. Ha ha ha, I can see God Alljager opening his arms to me. I can also go to the Martyr's Palace with the martyrs. Raymond replied loudly in the Northland language. His laughter made Tyrone's heart tremble involuntarily. Tyrone waved his hand and ordered the officer to execute Raymond. At this time, another officer came to report that a large number of enemy reinforcements were coming from the north of the town. Some of the soldiers on the town walls had already started fighting with the enemy. This officer also reported that the enemy had sent 4 airships flying towards Rayleigh town. They still have airships? This news made Tyrone a little shocked. He really didn't know that the enemy had not only successfully seized the Imperial airships, but also successfully replicated a few of them. Hopefully, they still don't know how to use these airships to their fullest potential. Tyrone comforted himself. He temporarily put aside the internal matters of Rayleigh town and focused on dealing with the real enemy outside the town. He knew that the upcoming battle would be extremely fierce. He ordered the officer to gather all the Imperial soldiers and put everyone into a state of war. Now was not the time to celebrate. These Northland people came really fast. They didn't even give people a chance to breathe. Since they want to die, I'll fulfill their wishes. Tyrone muttered to himself. After he finished speaking, the corner of his mouth rose into a slight smile. Raymond was taken away by the Imperial soldiers. They didn't have time to kill this cripple. After they dealt with the enemy outside the town, they would slowly torture these people to death. Wouldn't that be more interesting? Raymond was imprisoned in a cow pen in an abandoned farmhouse. An Imperial soldier was responsible for looking after him. Outside Rayleigh town, King Gravel's men, Lord Horf and Lord Bethman's men were gathered there. They were preparing for a full-scale siege. In fact, they wanted to take a detour to the south gate. This was because the fortifications there were the weakest. When the Imperial soldiers attacked the town, they blew up a huge gap. Over there, as long as they put in a little effort and sent people to attack the town, they should be able to quickly kill their way into the town. However, if this was the case, would the Imperial soldiers let them take a detour to the south gate? The Imperial soldiers weren't fools. They would definitely send soldiers to stop them. It seemed that a tough battle was inevitable. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.